Chapter 6:15. And at the last step of the plan, the target was still in a dream, watching the show from the sidelines. How could he not die? The grasp of this foresight, the subtlety of this psychological warfare, the dexterity and adaptability of this arrangement were all amazing. Chu Chi-huan admitted that if he were in the opponent's shoes, he would not be able to do all this. This was simply the ultimate killing method that only the god of killers could use. Killing people invisibly, and it was killing people invisibly with a borrowed knife. At the moment when Chu Chi-huan left, a sudden fear surged in his heart. What if this person is the opponent's? Thinking of this, he felt a chill on his back and sped up to disappear in the snow. Chu Chi-huan went far away. It was not until this moment that Han Shanzhang, who had stabilized his body with one leg, slowly fell to the sky. An arrow of blood shot out from his chest and back at the same time. His eyes were wide open, and a gurgling sound came from his throat. Then, he fell to the ground with a bang. His dead fish eyes looked at Jun Imo Xia as he struggled to ask, "Who are you?" "Me? I'm a human." Jun Moxie seemed to be a little frightened. "What I'm asking is, who exactly are you?" Han Shanzhang's eyeballs bulged out more and more, and the blood spurting from his chest had slowly become bloody foam. "I'm a man," Jun Imo Xia replied in a very honest and accurate manner. "You?" Han Shanzhang was so angry at this honest and accurate truth that his body jumped on the ground and then fell to the ground. He stopped moving, and breathed his last, "Fuck. I'm telling the truth. Do you think I'm a woman?" Jun Moxie spread his hands and said innocently. He died of anger just like that. How could he be so narrow-minded? Forget it, he can't even beat a disabled person. It's a waste of food to keep him alive. At this moment, the people in the hotel came to their senses from the extreme shock and let out a series of exclamations. It was as if a grenade had been thrown into a public toilet. Everyone was scared out of their wits and ran out. One by one, they charged into the snowstorm outside the door and left. Jun Imo Xia chuckled and said, "The show has come to an end. Let's go." "Wait. Little brother, you destroyed my shop and killed people. Are you going to leave without a word? Shouldn't you give the two of us an explanation?" Behind the counter, the two old men who had been pretending to sleep finally stood up and looked at Jun Moxie. Of the two old men, one had a red face and big ears, and a dignified appearance, the other had a red nose and was as thin as a skeleton. When they stood together, they contrasted with each other. It was quite comical. They didn't even look at the corpses on the ground, as if they were used to the pungent smell of blood. Both of them looked at Jun Moxie with a hint of vigilance. "Fuck. I say, old man, what kind of look is that? Didn't that disabled person who killed people just fly away? Why didn't you say anything then? Why are you stopping me now? What does this have to do with me? No matter what you say, it doesn't make sense. Even if you want to blackmail someone, you don't have a way to do it, do you? Do you think I'm easy to bully? You're wrong about me." Jun Moxie glared and shouted exaggeratedly. "You can't lie in front of a real person. Little brother, if it wasn't for you, that Chu Chi-huan wouldn't have been able to succeed so easily." The red-faced old man smiled. "Little brother, we don't mean any harm by stopping you. We just want to see the prey. Also, I want to ask, who is your master? I don't think there are many people in this world who can train such a young talent like you." This old man is really curious. He smiled, but it looked very strange, as if his face had been split into two halves. Upon closer inspection, it turned out that the center of the old man's face had been deeply slashed by a sword. His entire face had been cut into two halves. But the wound had healed quite well after the incident. If he didn't smile, it would be hard to tell. But when he smiled, his red muscles bulged, making him look even more terrifying. "Who is my master?" "My master is my wife." Jun Moxie laughed and pointed at Mei Shuyan. Mei Shuyan stood up and slowly walked over. She looked at the red-faced old man with her limpid eyes and finally said in a low voice, "So it's you too. If you didn't smile, I wouldn't have known who you were. Ren Pingsheng, you're still as crazy as ever. You two have changed a lot, and your martial power has advanced to an astonishing level. I think that Lei Baoyu and Buquang Feng are no match for you now. It's really worth congratulating. May I ask who you are? How do you know these two old men? The red-faced old man and the red-nosed old man looked at each other. They were shocked. They had been living in seclusion here, and no one had ever seen through their identities. So, how could they not be shocked when such a young girl had revealed their identities? You don't need to know who I am. But, today's matter isn't something you can interfere with. Mei Shuiyan said casually, I believe that the people from the three holy lands will be here soon. Although your strength has improved a lot and your cultivation has reached a higher level, if you don't want to get into trouble, you should stay out of it. I believe that since you have chosen to live in seclusion here, you have the idea that it's better to stay out of trouble. These two were the supreme masters of the previous generation. They were as famous as Lei Baoyu and Buquang Feng, the two masters of the rainstorm and gale. They were known as the cut through the wind and cloud, cut through the sky, Ren Wa Pingsheng, Ren Wa Quang. The red-faced old man was Ren Pingsheng, and the red-nosed old man was Shin Wa Quang. Yi Kuang's eyes flashed, and he chuckled, this old man thanks miss for your concern. Although we may not be able to provoke the three holy lands, if the three holy lands really want to make a move against us, I'm afraid they'll have to think twice. His tone was filled with arrogance, and it was obvious that he was very confident. Mei Shuiyan was just about to walk out when she suddenly turned around and looked at the two of them. A rare smile appeared on her face. You're actually so fearless. Could it be that you're already part of the Misty Illusory Manor? Could it be that the entrance to the Misty Illusory Manor is nearby? That's right, no wonder the two of you could advance so quickly. No wonder the two of you would choose to open a tavern in the middle of nowhere. I thought the two of you had been quiet for too long and wanted to move. So that's why. May I ask who you are? Ren Pingsheng and Shin Wa Quang's expressions changed. They flew in front of Mei Shuiyan, as if they were facing a formidable enemy. At the same time, their clothes began to bulge. It seemed that if Mei Shuiyan's answer did not satisfy them, they would not hesitate to fight. I am the same as you. Mei Shuiyan was silent for a while, and said softly, I am from the Tian Fa cave. If you go back, please pass on a message for me. So you are from Tian Fa? Ren Pingsheng and Shin Wa Quang breathed a sigh of relief. They looked at each other and saw the annoyance in each other's eyes. What message? Please speak, Mississippi, we have sacrificed too much in these years. Guarding the secret territory has taken up too much of our energy. And you guys still haven't received any news, and you've even set up that fog of the Misty Illusory Manor. To us, the losses are too great, and we can no longer make ends meet. And now, the three holy lands are even more aggressive. It seems that they will not stop until they destroy the beast kings of Tian Fa. If the Misty Mansion still wants to maintain this balance, first, warn the three holy lands to restrain themselves. Otherwise, we, Tian Fa, do not mind going to war. Second, remove the fog of the Misty Mansion, let us, Tian Fa, restore the inheritance of the Holy King. Mei Shuiyan said softly, I have been looking for the Misty Mansion for a long time. Do you really not care about the 9 Nether secret territory? When Mei Shuiyan said this, Jun Moxie actually heard the heartfelt bitterness in her words. Ren Pingsheng and Shin Wa Quang looked at each other, and said awkwardly, Miss, what you said is reasonable. But this is not something we can decide. Of course, I know you can't decide. That's why I asked you to pass on a message. If you still do not respond after the war for seizing the heavens, we, Tian Fa, will not contribute any more power to the secret territory. Mei Shuiyan Lengleng said resolutely, for the war for seizing the heavens, we, Tian Fa, have put in tens of thousands of years of effort, but now we are being chased by the three holy lands. The 9 Nether secret territory has been guarded since ancient times, and you will only send people to it when it is extremely urgent. In the end, he even set up a trap in the Misty Illusory Manor. Mei Shuyan's cold eyes were resolute. Since you don't care about this continent, do you think we, the Xian beasts, care more than you do? To put it bluntly, no matter if the strange races occupy the continent or the Nine Nether secret territory breaks out, our Tian Fa forest will still be the Tian Fa forest. There will be no change at all. Please pass on this message, word for word. That's all I have to say. Let's go. Mei Shuyan said softly to Jun Moxie, and held Dongfang Wenqin's hand. Ren Pingsheng and Yi Jiu Kuang looked embarrassed and made way for them. When they reached the door, Mei Shuyan looked up at the sky full of snow. She suddenly stopped and asked, Yunbi Chen is also in the Misty Mansion, right? He is not here. Yi Jiu Kuang was startled, and said, the guide had invited Yunbi Chen, but Yunbi Chen refused. Mei Shuyan replied indifferently, and with a swoosh, the three of them disappeared from the door. Ren Pingsheng stared blankly at the three of them as they left. Suddenly, he slapped his own mouth and said in annoyance, I'm such a bitch. It would have been better if I had just let them leave. Why did I have to be so curious and ask about their master's background? Now, I've created a Tian Fa cave.
Chapter 616. Yi Huang sighed and said, if we report this to the higher-ups, I'm afraid that both of us will be punished. We might even be stripped of our positions here and sent to someone else to take over. However, this isn't necessarily a bad thing. We can focus on improving our cultivation. Ren Pingsheng also sighed and said slowly, Old Kuang. Thinking back to the war in which both sides were injured, Feng Yu and Feng Yu entered the hermitage, and we came here by chance to recuperate. Then, we joined the Misty Mansion. How many years has it been? Still Kuang looked at the snow in front of him in confusion and murmured, how many years? I've already forgotten. Ren Pingsheng stood beside him and looked at the fluttering snow with him. He sighed and said sadly, actually, I really miss those days. I was so weak, but I could be titled as a supreme martial artist, above millions of people, and roamed the world for decades. Now, my strength is getting higher and higher, but I feel so weak. Old Kuang. Do you think what they said really exists? Still Kuang Lenglang said, don't forget, there are a few old monsters in the Misty Mansion now. This is an indisputable fact. Both of them sighed at the same time. In the distance, purple figures were flying, white robes fluttering, and hemp robes fluttering. The people of the three holy lands were rushing over from the snowstorm. Jun Moxie and Mei Shuyan were stepping on the sleigh, gliding like the wind on the snowy ground. On Mei Shuyan's back was Dongfang Wenxian. Jun Moxie wanted to carry him to show his filial piety, but Mei Shuyan forcefully snatched him away. Your son is filial, why can't I, your daughter-in-law, do the same? Dongfang Wenxian enjoyed the argument between the two. He was very satisfied with lying on his daughter-in-law's back. She thought to herself, this daughter-in-law is so generous and filial, she'll definitely become a good helper for Mo Xie. I heard that this brat has quite a few lovers. This time, when I go back, I'll check them carefully and use Shui Yan as the standard. On the way, Jun Moxie asked curiously, what Misty Mansion? What secret realm? Why haven't I heard of it before? Shui Yan, and your Tian Fa's bewildering fog, the one I entered before, was it the Misty Mansion bewildering fog? Mei Shuyan was silent for a long time. She lowered her head and hurried on. After a long time, she said, there's no benefit in knowing these things. I'll tell you if I have to. But right now, our level is not high enough. Jun Moxie responded with an, oh, and didn't ask any further. However, his heart was filled with endless mysteries. Mei Shuyan had said countless times before, the previous generation Saint King and Beast King had gone into seclusion because of some accident.
Now that he thought about it, they must be in the Misty Mansion bewildering fog. From what she said today, it was probably not that they went into seclusion, but that they couldn't come out after they went in, as for the accident, or the secret realm. But that bewildering fog was indeed powerful. Even with his spiritual sense, he couldn't sense anything. He thought that it was a natural phenomenon, but now he knew that it was actually man-made. This made June Moxie a little shocked. In this world, there were still many things that he didn't understand and couldn't understand. As the few of them were moving forward, June Moxie suddenly exclaimed and stopped. Right in front of them, on top of a tree, the tree was covered with white snow, and the sky was filled with white snow. A person in snow-white clothes was quietly attached to the tree. His eyes were like cold stars, looking at the three of them indifferently. His whole body seemed to have become one with the white snow. Even if one looked carefully, it would be extremely difficult to distinguish him. This was also because of June Dashao's extraordinary spiritual sense. Otherwise, it would be difficult to detect him. Chu Chihuan. He was actually waiting here. You rascal, you were indeed helping me on purpose just now. Chu Chihuan floated down on the snowy ground, but the pure white snow didn't leave a single trace. It was as if Chu Chihuan's entire body was weightless. And Chu Chihuan's eyes were even colder than the icicles. He looked at June Moxie, emitting an eerie chill. This sentence seemed to be to express his gratitude, but Chu Chihuan's expression was completely different. It was as if he was here to cause trouble. It's not that I'm helping you on purpose. I just don't want you to die so early. June Moxie also said indifferently as he exerted force on his feet. The sled under his feet broke into pieces and flew out with a snap. Facing Chu Chihuan, if he still had this thing tied to his feet, it was tantamount to courting death. Reason? Standing in the snow, Chu Chihuan actually gave people a kind of hazy feeling. It was as if his figure had faded and disappeared at this moment, and then appeared again in the next moment. At this time, he was not disguised, but still gave people a kind of feeling. It was like looking at flowers in the fog, and no matter how hard they looked, they couldn't see clearly what he looked like. Reason? Or, in this world, there are too few assassins who can make people's eyes light up. If the supreme assassin dies one day, there will be many less interesting things in this world. June Moxie still spoke abnormally indifferent, but when he said the words, supreme assassin, he suddenly deliberately emphasized it. When he said it word by word, a kind of heavy atmosphere suddenly formed. It was like the originally clear sky, and the sun was shining high up in the sky, but suddenly the curtain of night fell without warning.
At this time, he completely put away his playfulness. Although his face was calm, his tone was very serious. For June Dashao, this kind of seriousness was really rare. And this rare seriousness seemed to have an extremely desolate aura to it. Mei Shuyan suddenly felt that June Moxie had changed. At this moment, it was as if he had become the same as Chu Chihuan. The two of them faced each other like this, and neither of them made the first move. However, they were like two hungry wolves on the prairie, confronting each other fiercely. Both of them wanted to swallow the other into their stomachs. The two of them were like the two sharpest swords, hanging in the same room. They left their scabbards in the middle of the night, and roared like dragons and tigers, all for the sake of competing between the two swords, who was the sharpest. One was a peerless sharp weapon, brilliant, the other was a rare and extraordinary weapon, showing off its edge. Both of them carried extreme self-confidence, a kind of bloodthirst that believed that they could kill anyone in the world. This reason is not bad. Chu Chihuan, who was in the snow, seemed to lower his head and smile. Then he suddenly raised his head, and two sword-like eyes pierced through the snow and fog, shooting straight at June Moxie's face. The person who has been framing me, is it you? That's right and wrong. The person involved in this matter is indeed me, but no matter how you look at it, it can't be considered framing me. June Moxie smiled and said softly, I think you should be grateful to me, because I helped you achieve your unparalleled prestige. An immortal legend. As he said that, he suddenly raised his head, and his two eyes were like thunder and lightning, meeting Chu Chihuan's eyes. Four pairs of eyes met, and both of them felt pain in their eyes at the same time. But neither of them gave way, and they stared at each other intently. It's a pity that the unparalleled prestige that you've given me wasn't earned by my own efforts. Chu Chihuan Lengleng looked at him. Moreover, this glorious road is not only a dead end, but also a road of no return. If you were me, wouldn't you be grateful? But if you had chosen it yourself, would you have dared to work so hard? Jun Moxie also looked at him coldly. You wouldn't dare. But I dare. Not only do I dare, but I've also done it more than once. But after I've done it, you've been hunted down like a dog. That's the difference between you and me. So, I'm stronger than you. It turns out that we're in the same profession. But to say that you're stronger than me, you're not qualified yet. Chu Chi-hun stared unblinkingly at Jun Mo Xie's eyes. Although your killing intent is very sharp. Although your murderous aura is very sharp, I'm the supreme assassin in the world. As the supreme assassin, Chu Chihuan was naturally very sensitive to the murderous aura of Jun Moxie. Once Jun Moxie's nature was awakened, the first thing he felt was this legendary king among the assassins from the alternate world. Appreciating each other, but also repelling each other. So, Jun Moxie used the word supreme assassin to create a huge momentum, but now Chu Chihuan also used the same words to counterattack. I'm the supreme assassin. The supreme assassin in the world, the number one assassin, is me, Chu Chihuan, and not someone else. Not even you. Really? But don't you think your so-called murderous aura is too bloodthirsty? Jun Moxie took a step forward slowly, and with a bang, his right foot landed on the ground. At the same time, Chu Chihuan, who was tens of feet in front of him, seemed to have sensed it. His left foot took half a step back, and then he stepped back. But he deviated from his original footprint, and his body changed direction. He turned slightly sideways, facing Jun Moxie. You don't dare to fight? Jun Moxie's lips curled up. Why should I hide? Since you said I framed you, don't you want to take revenge? I always need money to kill people. Even my enemies are no exception. Chu Chihuan said calmly, this is the rule of an assassin. I won't fight without paying the price. Although you caused me to be chased by the 3 holy lands, you've helped me today. Moreover, it's not suitable to fight with you today. First, I've already released my murderous aura. He looked at Mei Xuan. Lengleng said, second, I have many misgivings. But you don't have these misgivings. But in the end, no matter what the reason is, it's a fact that you don't dare to fight. Jun Moxie said coldly, so, the supreme assassin should be me. Not you. This sentence was like a sharp needle, piercing into Chu Chihuan's heart. Chu Chihuan smiled coldly, and said coldly, the so-called supreme assassin of the world is just an empty title. But the supreme assassin of the world really exists. No one can surpass it. The position of the king is not won with words. It needs to be used with the sword, and it needs to be used to kill. Jun Mo Xie's words pulled Chu Chi-hun, who had thought of retreating, back to his original position. At this moment, the murderous aura from his body rose again. He didn't even bother to conceal it, nor did he consider that doing so would attract enemies. Yes, the king of assassins. Just for the title of king. Although this wasn't a very glorious profession, the two of them had reached the peak of this path. Chapter 617. Jun Mo Xie had Jun Mo Xie's pride. His pride stemmed from the evil monarch's undefeated victories. And Chu Chihuan had occupied the throne of the number one assassin for decades, and had a dignity that could not be infringed upon. From the moment the two of them met, they were at each other's throats, all for the sake of giving each other this feeling of unease. It was as if their positions were being seriously threatened. Within Jun Moxie's body, there was a long-lost bloodline flowing. His eyes were getting brighter and brighter, his murderous aura getting thicker and thicker, the bloodthirsty aura emanating from his bones, the crazed desire to kill awakened in his soul. Although I'm an assassin, I'm here now, representing Yan Huang. Behind me, I have 7 billion brothers and sisters. I can't lose. I can't lose. Do you dare to fight? Chu Chihuan suddenly stared straight at him, and said gloomily, let's see who is the king of assassins between you and me. A shocking battle intent suddenly burst forth from this supreme killer. At this moment, it was not killing intent that burst forth. It was fighting intent. Fight. Fight for glory. It's not because you want to fight, but because I want to fight with you. Jun Moxie straightened his back, and his whole body was like a bow that had been pulled into a full moon, and then suddenly returned to its taut state. His eyes shone with a dazzling light, and with strong self-confidence, he suddenly pressed forward, and the reason I want to fight is more important than the whole world. Ha ha ha. Awesome. In my, Chu Chihuan's, life, in terms of strength, there are not many people who can beat me, but they are not rare either. But in terms of killing intent and murderous aura, I have never seen anyone who can beat me. Chu Chihuan laughed heartily, and said, you are the first. Even if you die in battle later, I believe it will be a comfort. It's a pity that the loser of this battle will definitely not be me. In this world, I have fought a fair battle, and you are also the first one. And I believe you are also the only one. Jun Moxie said gloomily, this battle is for the reason in my heart. For the glory of my heart. I will make an exception and grant you a chance to have a fair fight with me. Give me a chance to fight fairly. Chu Chihuan wanted to laugh, but he realized that he couldn't. Because he realized that the other party wasn't joking. From this sentence, Chu Chihuan could even feel an enormous pressure from the bottom of his heart. Am I the only one to have a fair fight? What kind of explanation was that? What kind of person would say something like that? What kind of person had never faced a head-on battle in their life? Assassin. Only a top-notch ultimate assassin would have this kind of understanding. Only top-notch assassins who walked in the shadows and would deal a fatal blow to their targets once they had the chance to do so. Therefore, it was only when the two top assassin kings met each other that they were most unwilling to resort to conspiracies and sneak attacks. Because this battle had nothing to do with life or death, it was only a battle for supreme glory. At this moment, what Jun Moxie said was the truth. He would never have a fair fight with anyone. His endless tricks allowed him to challenge and kill those who were at a higher level than him. In Jun Moxie's eyes, the so-called fair fight was a stupid way of fighting. Battle was a battle of life and death. Survival of the fittest, where was the fairness? No matter what methods were used, as long as the opponent was killed, he would be the winner. Only the surviving party had the right to say the word fairness. But today, facing Chu Chihuan, Jun Moxie made an exception and used the word fairness to describe the upcoming battle. A fair and square battle. In the name of the descendant of Yen and Huang, as the descendant of the dragon. Take the crown of the king of my profession fairly. Follow me. Since we want a fair fight, we naturally have to find a suitable place. Jun Mo Xie's figure floated up, riding the wind amidst the snowstorm. His figure was hazy and indistinct like lightning. A white robe separated the snowy sky and disappeared in a flash. Chu Chihuan laughed and his eyes revealed a look of admiration. Then, it turned into a cold and sharp sword aura. His body flew up and disappeared with a swoosh, following Jun Moxie. Shui Yan, isn't there something wrong with Mo Xie? Dongfang Wen Xian leaned on Mei Shuiyan's back, her brows tightly furrowed, a look of deep thought on her face. Why is it that when Mo Xie saw this supreme assassin, he seemed to have changed into a different person? Just now. I almost couldn't believe that that was my son, Mother, Mo Xie doesn't care about anything else. He only cares about the word assassin. But, he is very obsessed with it. I don't know why. Mei Shuiyan was worried and said absent-mindedly. Then this fight will be dangerous. Let's go and take a look. Dongfang Wenxin urged. Her eyes were full of anxiety. The reputation of the supreme assassin was comparable to the reputation of the whole Dongfang family. How could it be ordinary? And, I will naturally bring my mother over to help Mo Xie. However, I believe that Imo Xia will not let anyone help him in this fight. I can feel it. Mei Shuiyan reminded Dongfang Wenxin tactfully. I can also feel his eagerness for this fight. It seems like this is his biggest dream. And this dream has been going on for a long time. Dongfang Wenxin frowned and sighed deeply. She said with a heartache, what kind of change could make Imo Xia, the young master of an aristocratic family, become like this? Shuiyan. My son is suffering. My heart hurts. Don't worry. Imo Xia has absolute confidence. Mei Shuiyan sighed softly. Her slender body swept up. Although she was carrying a living person on her back, she was still as light as a willow catkin. She drifted away like the wind. Behind her, a gentle whirlwind swept up and wiped away all the traces on the ground. There was no longer any trace of someone passing by. Even when Mei Shuiyan had completely disappeared in the snow with Dongfang Wenxin on her back, the small whirlwind behind her did not stop. Although the wind was small, it never stopped spinning. In the end, it suddenly exploded in the air, sweeping away the killing intent and battle intent of the two king of assassins in the air. Imo Xia took the lead, his silhouette faintly discernible. In a flash, he had covered a distance of several tens of zhang. He was running like a meteor, but his figure seemed to be taking a leisurely stroll in a courtyard. His movements were as smooth as flowing water, confident and elegant. His toes did not seem to touch the ground at all. Only when he passed by a blade of grass or a branch would he lightly tap on it. Then, he would borrow the force to fly away again. Chu Chihuan followed closely behind him. Except for the distance of 7 feet at the beginning, he did not manage to catch up for even an inch. However, Jun Moxie did not manage to widen the distance again either. Chu Chihuan's Qing Gong was really similar to Jun Moxie's Yin Yang escape art. During the high-speed movement, his figure was also faintly discernible, appearing and disappearing in a flash, then reappearing and disappearing again, chasing after the blurry figure in front of him. Although Chu Chihuan did not manage to shorten the distance between him and Jun Moxie, the battle intent in his eyes was getting more and more intense. At this moment, the two king of assassins were fighting for supremacy. It was a contest of movement skills and speed. Only by moving fast and unpredictable could one surprise and kill the target with one strike. Only by moving fast could one kill the target before the enemy could react, and then escape thousands of miles away. Chu Chihuan was now following behind Jun Moxie. It only took him a moment to understand why he was framed. It was so obvious that no matter how he tried to explain, it would be useless. The Qing Gong and Jun Moxie's movement skills were too similar. At this moment, even he himself felt that if the person in front of him attacked him, it would be really unreasonable if he did not take the blame for it. It was too similar. Jun Moxie's movement skills were mysterious and unpredictable. He would appear and disappear in places that others would never think of. On the other hand, Chu Chihuan's movement skills were strange. It was boundlessly strange. It was faintly discernible, and there were layers upon layers of afterimages. It was impossible to figure out which one was his real body. The only difference was that Jun Moxie's movement skills had a trace of faintly discernible aura. It was a phenomenon that shouldn't exist in an assassin's Qing Gong. However, Jun Moxie's movement skills had this kind of aura. On the other hand, Chu Chihuan's movement skills were in line with the principles of the King of Assassins. He was like a ghost shuttling back and forth between day and night. However, the two of them had one thing in common: whether they were flying, leaping up, or landing on the ground, their postures were completely different. At every moment, they would adjust their movements to the best angle of attack. They could draw their swords, strike their palms, kick their legs, and even any part of their body could launch multiple waves of deadly attacks in an instant. Although the two of them were running at full speed, they were also paying attention to each other's movements. From the beginning until now, the two of them had developed a kind of admiration for each other. It was like being at the top of a mountain. Just when you were feeling proud and complacent, you suddenly found out that there was someone else at the top of the mountain who was also feeling complacent. You couldn't help but feel a kind of "I'm not lonely" mentality at the same time. This was a very strange mentality. Speaking of which, whether it was Jun Moxie or Chu Chihuan, these two people's martial arts skills were not the best in this world. In fact, compared to the real experts at the top, they were not just one level lower. But these two people's vigilance, grasp of propriety, choice of attack angle, and high level of vigilance had truly reached the peak. Chapter 618. Fifth chapter. Physically and mentally exhausted, the dense forest beneath them flashed by, the grassland beneath their feet disappeared without a trace, the mountains and boulders were instantly left far behind. The further they went, the more desolate and desolate it became. Along the way, he didn't know how far he had run. Under the guidance of Jun Moxie, the three of them formed a straight line, passing through the wind and snow. Dongfang Wen Xian, who was on Mei Shuiyan's back, was gradually surprised. His daughter-in-law was really amazing. Carrying such a big person on her back, she had run for at least a few hundred miles, and her speed didn't decrease at all. Her breath was long and relaxed, as if she didn't expend any energy. She wasn't any slower than the two guys in front of her, and even had a lot of energy left over. If she really exerted her strength, she could easily catch up with the two guys in front of her. Lying on her back, he watched the mountains and trees turn into blurry shadows that passed by him at high speed. This kind of speed was as fast as lightning, but he didn't feel the wind and snow blowing on his face at all. He didn't feel it at all. It was as if he was sitting peacefully at home. If he hadn't been worried about his son, even if he had really fallen asleep, he wouldn't have been woken up by the jolting. It seemed that the level of his daughter-in-law's Xian cultivation had definitely reached the peak of perfection, and could only be stronger than his son's. I really don't know how my son flirts with girls. He's actually so valiant to be able to bring such a perfect girl who has the combination of beauty, magic skills, personality, temperament, and demeanor into his home. He's really a promising man. Dongfang Wen Xian didn't know that she had underestimated a few things. This good daughter-in-law was also the #1 person in Tian Fa, the current leader of the world, the supreme ruler of one of the three saints and one ferocious beasts. If he knew all these, maybe Dongfang Wen Xian would faint. There was a big slanting valley in front of them, and Jun Moxie's figure landed here without hesitation. Chu Chihuan followed behind, and his body floated down like a willow catkin along with the snowflakes. When he landed, he saw that Jun Moxie was already standing in front of him. Jun Moxie's blade-like eyes were glinting coldly as he looked at him. Not bad speed. Such a good movement technique. The two of them spoke at the same time. While they were praising him, there was a hint of unwillingness in their tone. Both of them were well aware that in this competition of speed, the two of them were tied. Jun Moxie didn't shake off Chu Chihuan, and Chu Chihuan didn't catch up with Jun Moxie either. In terms of movement techniques, the two of them were about the same. Mei Shuiyan carried Dongfang on her back and rushed over like a puff of smoke. She landed a few hundred feet away from them. He stopped quietly. Just as Dongfang and Wenxin had judged, Mei Shuiyan's Qinggong was better than the two of them. However, she didn't want to interrupt the competition, so she didn't use her Qinggong to its fullest. Before this, Jun Moxie had used his actions to show his sincerity. The first competition of speed and movement techniques was also a hint to Mei Shuiyan, I don't want anyone to interfere. Jun Moxie's eyes were as sharp as an eagle's. Suddenly, he smiled, and his handsome face revealed a cold-blooded cruelty. Chu Chihuan, let me see your martial arts. Chu Chihuan's face turned pale, and he said calmly, I want to see it. Both of them didn't make the first move. They just stood facing each other, but suddenly, they moved almost at the same time. Chu Chihuan dashed forward, and his pair of iron fists smashed the snowflakes in the air. It was unstoppable. Jun Moxie also dashed forward quickly. The two of them were like two speeding trains, and they were about to collide in the middle. However, at the last moment when the two of them were about to collide, their figures flashed strangely. Jun Moxie disappeared first, and at the same time, Chu Chihuan also disappeared suddenly. The battlefield seemed to have become empty. However, in the middle of the battlefield, the sound of punches and kicks could be heard continuously. The snowflakes on the ground suddenly flew up, and the sound of punches and kicks could be heard hundreds of times per second. However, the two of them didn't show their bodies. They just rolled around in the air, invisible and traceless. However, the strong wind was blown away, and the snowflakes that fell would break into pieces and float back up. Gradually, a thick wall of snow was formed in the air. It was pushed up by the two of them, and it actually became solid in the air. Bang! With a loud bang, two white figures appeared at the same time. They broke through the wall of snow above their heads at almost the same speed, and in the process, they were still attacking crazily. Every attack was aimed at the opponent's fatal point. Once any of the attacks landed, at least one of them would be crippled. Jun Moxie's palm was ethereal and illusory. Halfway through, his palm suddenly turned into a claw, and fiercely stabbed at Chu Chihuan's throat. Chu Chihuan raised his right arm and blocked his throat, while his left fist rushed out like lightning, aiming at Jun Moxie's temple. Jun Moxie tilted his head, and kicked 3 times silently, aiming at Chu Chihuan's 3 vital acupoints, Zhongji, Sanyuan, and Dantian. All of them were fatal acupoints. As long as any one of them was hit, Chu Chihuan would be dead. At the same time, Jun Moxie's first palm met with Chu Chihuan's arm. Bang! Bang! 3 sounds followed, and both of them somersaulted at the same time, and stood steadily on the snowy ground. It turned out that the 3 kicks from Jun Moxie just happened to meet the 3 sneak attacks from Chu Chihuan. Chu Chihuan praised in his heart. He had nearly 100 years of fighting experience, and every time after a battle, he would ponder over it for a long time, and improve many of his deadly combat techniques. But now, facing his opponent, he actually couldn't gain the upper hand. And the battle was far from over. It was just the beginning. Jun Moxie had just stood on the opposite side, and with a sway of his body, he turned into a gust of wind. Chu Chihuan shouted coldly, but this time, he didn't use his body movement skills. Instead, he spun rapidly on the spot like a top. His hands and feet were like the 1,000-armed guanyin, and layers of strange lotus flowers bloomed to protect his body, while he counterattacked with all his strength. Around Chu Chihuan's body, a small tornado suddenly formed, whirling and whirling. Streams of energy surged out from this shapeless tornado. Attacks were launched from all directions, and even from the top of the head and the soles of the feet, using all kinds of methods. The tornado brought along a thick layer of snow, and suddenly flew up, becoming thicker and thicker. The white snow piled up like a white dragon, dancing wildly in the 9 heavens. Bang, 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 a series of continuous attacks. A continuous series of explosions rang out. Finally, a muffled groan. The snow column suddenly scattered, and Jun Moxie appeared. Opposite him, Chu Chihuan staggered 3 steps back, and his robe split open with a bang, and a clear palm print floated down. 2 trembling sounds came from his back, and 2 palm prints fell off his robe like leaves. Chu Chihuan snorted coldly, took a deep breath, and suddenly shouted, "You, take one of my moves." His body jumped up, and disappeared in a flash in the air. This time, it was Jun Imo Xia who was in charge of defense. Just like Chu Chihuan, Jun Moxie did not use his strange body movement skills to disappear, but instead, he moved around in a small area, and his feet quickly changed his position. His body suddenly flew up and suddenly fell down. When he flew up, he would reach a height of 10 feet, and when he landed, he would be as small as a dwarf. The continuous sounds of attacks and collisions were like the wind blowing on lotus leaves, and the rain hitting on banana leaves. It was continuous, dense, and unending. Finally, Jun Moxie let out a "ha," and his feet slid straight out of the space of 7 feet, as if he was stepping on a slide. At the same time, Chu Chihuan's figure also appeared, and his eagle-like eyes flashed with a trace of disappointment. 2 almost inaudible sounds were heard, and a palm-shaped rag fell from Jun Moxie's left shoulder. At the same time, 2 thin pieces of cloth floated down from his calf, Chu Chihuan's two most powerful palms forced Jun Moxie to fly up 10 feet into the air helplessly. And because of this, the two palms that should have hit his back instead hit his calf. In terms of fighting, I lost. Chu Chihuan looked a little sad, but the next moment, he raised his head. Although there was still a trace of disappointment on his face, there was not a trace of shame. His eyes were still full of fighting spirit, and they were burning like fire, but as calm as ice. Thank you for letting me win. I won by luck. Jun Moxie's expression was not good either. Just now, he had used 8 trigrams Wandering Body Palm, Shaolin's Dragon Capture Skill, 18 Arhat Fists, and was even forced to use Tan Tui Hong Fist and Long Fist. He had used a total of 37 fist techniques and palm techniques. Only then did he manage to fend off Chu Chihuan's storm-like attacks. In the end, both of them were hit by 3 palms each, and Chu Chihuan was hit on his chest and back. They were all fatal spots. But Jun Moxie was hit on his shoulder and calf. It was clear at a glance. There was no doubt that Jun Moxie had the upper hand, and the victor was clear. If they really fought to the death, while Chu Chihuan would definitely die, Jun Moxie would also be heavily injured and crippled. Although being crippled was better than dying, it was still not a complete victory. So, when Jun Moxie said that he won by luck, he meant it from the bottom of his heart. Of course, if they really fought to the death, Jun Moxie only needed to use the yin-yang escape or the 5 elements technique that he hadn't used in this fight. But this fight was related to the title of King of Assassins, so Jun Moxie wanted to use his true strength to completely convince Chu Chihuan. If he were to lose in such a dubious manner, this arrogant supreme assassin would never be convinced even if he were to die. Sword. Chu Chihuan stretched out his hand, and the Autumn Dew Invincible Sword suddenly appeared in his hand with a dreamy light. The blade of the sword spun slightly, and the snowflakes in the sky became a beautiful scene from a dream. One battle to decide the winner. The winner lives, and the loser dies. Chu Chihuan said solemnly, and his eyes shone brightly. If that's the case, you will lose for sure. Jun Moxie smiled evilly, and he stretched out his hand. Clang! The sound of the sword was crisp, clear, and loud. An unparalleled sword aura also appeared in Jun Moxie's hand abruptly. A snow-white long sword was held in his hand quietly. The body of the sword was silver, and light flowed around it, reflecting the faint color of blood. The sword aura flickered, and an indescribable aura suddenly spread out. But the target was not Chu Chihuan, but the Autumn Dew Invincible Sword in Chu Chihuan's hand. It was like an emperor who came out for a walk, and suddenly saw his subordinate. This was a kind of aloof arrogance that came from his bones. Even if it was just a casual glance, it would be an invisible pressure. Chapter 619. The moment the blood of yellow flame was unsheathed, Chu Chihuan suddenly felt that the Autumn Dew Invincible Sword, which he had relied on for his entire life, had suddenly lost contact with him. Chu Chihuan was shocked, and he almost thought that the Autumn Dew Invincible Sword was no longer in his hands. But the clear feeling in his palms told him that the Autumn Dew Invincible Sword was still in his hands. What is going on? The Autumn Dew Invincible Sword was undoubtedly his most loyal and reliable companion. It was also his trademark as a supreme assassin. Chu Chihuan had always treasured it like his own life. Every time he held it in his hands, he felt a strange connection with it. It was as if he, himself, was this sword. Every time he wanted to kill someone, he would feel as if this sword was crazily thirsting for fresh blood. At that time, there would be a resonance that seemed to belong to the soul of the netherworld. Truly, the man was the sword, and the sword was the man. Man and sword as one, inseparable. But at this moment, that strange feeling actually disappeared without a trace. How is this possible? How can this be? Chu Chihuan felt his palms sweating. At this moment, Chu Chihuan felt for the first time that he had lost confidence in this battle. He had completely lost his confidence. You still want to fight? You've already lost. But you didn't lose to my hands, but to my sword. More accurately, your sword has already submitted to my blood of yellow flame. Jun Moxie had not expected such a situation to occur. Ever since the blood of yellow flame had been tempered by Jun Moxie with the mysterious power of gold, it had developed a spirit of its own. It had never seen any treasured sword of a high enough level flaunt its prowess in front of it. Following the advancement of Jun Moxie's cultivation, the pride of the blood of yellow flame had also risen. It had drawn its sword at this crucial moment, wanting to have a good spar with Chu Chihuan and have a fair duel. Who would have thought that this fellow would create absolute unfairness the moment he drew his sword? It was an overwhelming advantage. The sword descends upon the heavens, the sovereign of 10,000 swords. How could the Xian myriad swords dare to disobey? Although Chu Chihuan hadn't been defeated yet, and he was still brimming with battle intent, the Autumn Dew Invincible's sword in his hand had already submitted to the blood of Yellow Flame's sword Emperor's heavenly might. Under the majestic aura of the blood of Yellow Flame, there was practically no room for struggle as it was completely subdued by the peerless sharpness of the blood of Yellow Flame. There was no more murderous aura, no more will to fight. The current Autumn Dew Invincible sword in Chu Chihuan's hands was not even as good as a sword forged from ordinary iron. How were they supposed to fight this battle? At this moment, Jun Xie didn't know whether to laugh or cry. He even had a very strange feeling. The situation in front of him was like a fight between two rabbits. One of the rabbits looked for the other rabbit to be its helper and was full of confidence. But the opposite rabbit suddenly summoned a big tiger to help it. Wasn't this bullying? Chu Chihuan tried his best to rouse the battle intent in his heart. In fact, that sharp killing intent burst forth, trying to make his sword and himself return to the state where they were one with each other. But all his efforts were in vain. The veins on Chu Chihuan's hand that was tightly gripping the hilt of his sword suddenly bulged out. He still stood there calmly, but he knew that he had lost. And he had lost in an extremely unjust manner, to the point that he had lost without any rhyme or reason. Facing this terrifying assassin who might not have appeared even once in a million years, not to mention losing control of his treasured sword, even the slightest flaw would be enough to defeat him without a doubt. In such a battle between peak assassins, defeat meant death, and certain defeat meant certain death. Your sword is undoubtedly a good sword. Jun Moxie smiled and said. In these years, you've killed countless people and swept across the world. And the sword in your hand has also developed its own spirituality under the nourishment of countless fresh blood. Your sword is also in harmony with your mind, and is connected by blood. It can be said to be a top-notch divine weapon. But even though it's a divine weapon, it's still too immature. So, when it faced the sword in my hand, it would instinctively choose to protect itself. Chu Chihuan frowned, and a trace of doubt flashed in his eyes. He said lightly, "Oh? But, if you're determined to die today, you can stimulate your sword with that kind of tragic mentality, and it can still arouse the tacit understanding between you two. This is also the only way to reconnect with it and continue this battle. Because even though you don't know, your sword does. Once it comes into contact with my sword, it will instantly break." Jun Moxie smiled lightly and said, "But, in that case, this battle will lose its original meaning. If I fight you with this divine sword, it will be an unfair victory, and it will be a joke. Even though you have the intention to take my life, I only want to determine victory and defeat with you. What I said before, if the Supreme Assassin dies, there will be many less wonderful things in the world. That was my heartfelt words, and not a casual remark. I really don't want to kill a peerless assassin like you, and I don't want to destroy a treasured sword that already has spirituality." He raised his head and looked at Chu Chihuan. "Chu Chihuan, why don't we call it a day?" He sighed and said, "Actually, I don't want to call it a day more than you do. In life, it's hard to find a good friend, but it's even harder to find a well-matched opponent. I believe you should be able to understand my feelings right now." Chu Chihuan was silent for a while, and said, "You're right. If I force myself to fight at this moment, I'll be overestimating my own strength and seeking my own death. I'll lose the original meaning of this battle, and I'll also lose the most important companion in my life. However, I want to see your sword." I want to know what kind of divine weapon it is, to be able to make my Autumn Dew invincible sword cower before the battle, and surrender without a fight. Speaking of which, this request of Chu Chihuan was an extremely unreasonable one, and could even be said to be ridiculous. A sword that was easy to wield was equivalent to an assassin's second life. How could it be something that others could see just because they wanted to? Just like Chu Chihuan's own Autumn Dew invincible sword, could it be casually shown to others? Let alone Jun Moxie's blood of yellow flame. Actually, Chu Chihuan also knew that his request was a little rash, and even Jun Moxie's rejection was within his expectations. However, he still looked at Jun Moxie without blinking. Because he really couldn't accept his loss. Everyone's strength is roughly on the same level, so why should I lose because of the difference in weapons? Just what is so outstanding about the opponent's sword, to be able to make my Autumn Dew invincible sword bow its head, and even lose before the battle? Chu Chihuan, who had long become one with the Autumn Dew invincible sword, did not have any longing for the divine weapon in Jun Moxie's hands, but his curiosity was extremely strong. Otherwise, he wouldn't have made such an absurd request. Facing this unexpected request, Jun Moxie fell silent for a moment, before lightly raising the sword in his hand and bringing it to his lips. He said softly, "He can't accept his loss, and wants to see you. Can you?" His voice was strangely gentle, as if he was coaxing a child. The blood of yellow flame clanged in Jun Moxie's hand, and even Chu Chihuan could clearly hear the arrogance and disdain in it. Jun Moxie smiled and said to Chu Chihuan, "You can see, but only through my hand." At this time, Mei Shuiyan and Dongfang Wen Xian walked over slowly. As they neared, Mei Shuiyan and Dongfang Wen Xian discovered an extremely unbelievable thing at the same time. Jun Moxie and Chu Chihuan, the two men who were fighting to the death just a moment ago, were actually standing together with their heads facing each other, staring at the sword in Jun Moxie's hand. Especially Chu Chihuan's face, which was filled with an expression of pilgrimage. Such a divine sword was indeed a divine weapon that any Xian cultivator would dream of. It was a good companion that would never leave one's side. What surprised Mei Shuiyan the most was that Chu Chihuan was completely defenseless, and the hilt of the blood of yellow flame was still in Jun Moxie's hand. If Jun Moxie suddenly launched a sneak attack, Chu Chihuan would definitely not have any chance to escape. He would definitely be cut in half. How could this be? A person with such low vigilance, was he still the king of assassins from before? And there was also Jun Moxie. This fellow had a proud expression on his face, as if he was showing off a treasure, proudly showing off the divine sword in his hand. Similarly, he was also wide open, completely defenseless. What's wrong with these two? Are they crazy? Are they stupid? Did water get into their brains? After a long time, Chu Chihuan forcefully retracted his gaze and took a few steps back. That cold aura appeared on his body again. He raised his face and used his face to welcome the snowflakes in the sky, hoping to calm his burning heart down. He sighed and said, "There's actually such a divine sword in this world. Such a miraculous thing. It's really an eye-opener for me. This round, my defeat is not unjust, and the Autumn Dew invincible sword is not unjust either. No, the Autumn Dew invincible sword is more insightful than me, and knows when to advance and when to retreat." Jun Moxie chuckled and said, "In this world, there are still many things that you don't know." Chu Chihuan lowered his head sadly, caressing his Autumn Dew invincible sword tenderly, a look of deep longing in his eyes. Jun Moxie's blood of yellow flame was undoubtedly a peerless divine weapon in the world, and it was also an invincible treasure. Compared to it, his own sword was undoubtedly far too inferior. But Chu Chihuan felt that his own sword was the weapon that he was most comfortable with. The Autumn Dew invincible sword was the most important to him. No matter how good other people's swords are, this sword of mine has accompanied me for many years. An assassin has no family, only a sword. This sword is my family. No divine weapon, no peerless divine weapon can replace it. Chu Chihuan caressed his Autumn Dew invincible sword gently. At this moment, he could clearly feel the comfort and excitement coming from the Autumn Dew invincible sword. Chu Chihuan was stunned. Previously, he only felt a sense of closeness and familiarity, or perhaps a connection of blood. But he had never felt any emotions from this sword. But today, at this moment, he actually felt it clearly. This sword, just like a human, also had emotions and feelings. Chapter 620. This kind of wonderful feeling caused Chu Chihuan's heart to tremble for a moment. Since we've decided to stop fighting, I'd like to ask you about something. Jun Moxie also sheathed his divine sword, and kissed the blade. You've really made this big brother proud today. I've just unsheathed my sword, and the opponent's sword has already raised a white flag. What's called the graceful bearing of a sword emperor? What's called a sovereign descending upon the world? Isn't this it? I'm really going to die from pleasure today. What's the matter? Chu Chihuan raised his head, and looked at him indifferently. The supreme assassin instantly regained his usual calmness after observing the sword. Since you're called the supreme assassin, then the Blood Sword Hall, which specializes in killing people, and is known as the #1 assassin organization in the Xian continent, are they your people? Jun Moxie asked in a deep voice, and a faint blood-red light flashed in his eyes. Are you looking down on me, or are you thinking too highly of those bastards? Do you think that I, Chu Chihuan, would have any relations with those bastards? They're not even qualified to carry my shoes. Chu Chihuan glared at him with some dissatisfaction. One sword to travel 1,000 miles, 10,000 miles of mountain passes, one man and one sword, enjoying solitude and slaughter. This is me, Chu Chihuan. What *T Blood Sword Hall? I don't know anything about it. Then I'm relieved. Fortunately, this has nothing to do with you. Otherwise, even if I admire you, you'd still have to die. Jun Moxie relaxed in his heart and said coldly. Even if you don't want to kill me, I'll definitely die this time. I've never had the extravagant hope that I'll still be alive after this. Chu Chihuan laughed heartily, his expression calm. It's really not easy to take the blame for this. In order to kill me, the 3 Holy Lands have already sent out no less than 300 experts. I hid in a densely populated area from the mountainous area, and then I was chased out again. The encirclement gradually tightened, and now I'm confined to this corner. Previously, it could be said that I've taken the blame for you, but now, I've really taken care of 3 supreme masters from the illusory Blood Sea. There's no room for negotiation between the two sides. This stretch of several thousand miles of mountains and rivers, I don't know where the feng shui is good enough to bury me, Chu Chihuan. He was talking about his own life and death, but his expression did not change. He was still cold and natural, as if he was talking about something that had nothing to do with him. As the king of assassins, he was already indifferent to life and death. Whether it was the life and death of others or their own, it was the same. Then why don't you hide in the downtown area? Although it is difficult to hide in the court, it is not a bad place to hide in the city. Jun Moxie asked. How can I, Chu Chihuan, be that kind of person who steals from others? I, Chu Chihuan, am an assassin. I've killed good people, and I've killed bad people. But there has never been an innocent person who died for me. Although I kill people like flies, those who died because of me died under my sword. They died under my hands. Chu Chihuan's expression was cold and indifferent, but his eyes flashed with pride. This is what an assassin is. If one day, I really die under someone else's hands, I won't complain. Chu Chihuan smiled coldly. Since I've come out to kill, then I should be prepared to be killed at any time. This kind of thing, to put it bluntly, is not a big deal. You're also an assassin, don't you understand this? Jun Moxie was silent. How could he not understand this? Just like Jun Moxie had his own principles, Chu Chihuan also had his own pride that belonged to him, Chu Chihuan. Just like what Chu Chihuan had said, the strength of the 3 Holy Lands this time was too strong. Even he and Mei Xueyan did not have the confidence to face them head-on. They could only hide and wait for an opportunity to counterattack. Not to mention Chu Chihuan. It was not easy for Chu Chihuan to be able to hold on until now. Relying on assassination, he might be able to deal with one or two of them. But, if the other party had the chance to stall for a while, hundreds of strong experts would rush over immediately. So what if Chu Chihuan's skills were exquisite? After all, he could not hide in the Hongjun Pagoda like Jun Moxie and disappear without a trace, completely disappearing from this world, just like the battle the other day. If not for Jun Moxie's help to create the most suitable atmosphere, Chu Chihuan would not have been able to kill 2 people and 1 person in one move. According to Chu Chihuan's original plan, even if he attacked when they were unprepared, he would at most be able to kill 1 person. After that, he would be lucky to retreat. How could he kill 3 strong enemies like this? Before this, I am not willing to die like this. Because I still do not know who is the one who framed me. So I want to know, I want to understand the truth. Chu Chihuan looked at Jun Moxie surprisingly warmly. Now, this wish of mine has finally been fulfilled. To be able to see you before I die, I am very gratified. Perhaps your identity is not an assassin, but you are the strongest assassin I have ever seen in my life. Perhaps you are even stronger than me. Because you are much younger than me. I only hope that you can promise me one thing. Chu Chihuan's eagle-like eyes fixed on Jun Moxie. I can die, Chu Chihuan can also die. But the Supreme Assassin cannot die. The Supreme Assassin is not any other Supreme Assassin, nor is it a Xian cultivation level, but a true Supreme Assassin. The highest honor in the world of assassins. Chu Chihuan said word by word, I think you should understand the meaning of this sentence better than I do. What if you cannot die? Or, what if Chu Chihuan and the Supreme Assassin will not die? Jun Moxie looked at him seriously. If the Supreme Assassin needs help, then he is not worthy of being called the Supreme Assassin. Chu Chihuan flatly refused, not even letting Jun Moxie explain his intention. I do not need your help. I am even more unwilling to live under someone else's roof. Even if I am under 1 person and above millions of people, I am not willing. Above the Supreme Assassin, there is only the sky, nothing else. As for the matter of you framing me, you don't have to feel that you owe me anything, because our skills are too similar. If you were famous before me, I would also frame you. Even if we make a move, we don't need to deliberately frame each other. People will naturally suspect each other. Chu Chihuan laughed heartily and was actually extremely carefree. Perhaps, as you said, you and I didn't know each other before this. No matter what others say, or even if I purposely put the blame on you, I wouldn't feel the slightest bit of remorse. In times of crisis, I would do anything for my own life. There is nothing wrong with it. I have never felt that framing you is wrong. Jun Moxie looked at him with his sharp eyes and said slowly, but don't forget that there is no winner or loser between us. The Supreme Assassin is still undecided, or the sky is above the Supreme Assassin, but you, Chu Chihuan, may not be the only one above you, right? If I have the title of the Supreme Assassin because someone else killed you, for me, it is a disgrace, not an honor. Chu Chihuan's eyes narrowed, and he looked at Jun Moxie. I have lost in terms of fists and kicks. You can have this title with a clear conscience. But are you really willing? Are you going to give up the title of the Supreme Assassin just like that? Although others may not know, but are you really willing? Jun Moxie took a step forward and asked in an overbearing manner. I am not willing. What else can I do? Chu Chihuan's eyes flashed with a sharp light. At this time, Mei Shuiyan reminded him, Moxie, there are many masters coming here from afar. It seems that the fight between the two of you has attracted the attention of some people. Let's talk somewhere else. Chu Chihuan's face turned cold, and his right hand slowly touched the hilt of his sword. Since you are not willing, why don't we use another method to determine the winner? Jun Moxie said casually, you can tell that the people coming are either Supreme Assassins or Superior Supreme Assassins. There are 8 of them. Why don't we use these people as a means of competition? We will use the skills that assassins are best at as stakes. Let's see who the Supreme Assassin is. Let's see who kills more. Chu Chihuan's eyes lit up. It's not enough to compete in numbers, it also depends on who kills faster. Jun Moxie's eyes were burning with fighting spirit. You must know that these people are not only your enemies, but also our enemies. You don't want to be killed by them, but I don't want them to live either. Chu Chihuan laughed and said, I didn't expect that I, Chu Chihuan, would meet a kid like you before I die. This is one of the happiest things in life. Alright, let's compete in this round. Let's see who the supreme assassin is. Amidst the laughter, Chu Chihuan and Jun Moxie's bodies disappeared in a flash. They completely disappeared in the snow and in the air. Snowflakes flew in the air. Mei Xuan sighed softly. She waved her hand and a big hole appeared on the snow wall behind her. She and Dongfang Wenxin hid in the hole. The intact snow was recycled again, and the hole was filled up without a trace. This skill was learned from Jun Moxie when he went to the Dongfang family. It was very convenient. Swoosh swoosh swoosh, in just a moment, a few figures arrived and landed on the snowy ground. Then, they ran around the snowy ground. In an instant, they searched the whole snowy valley carefully. Their sharp and vigilant eyes searched every corner. Finally, they stopped at the place where Jun Moxie and Chu Chihuan were fighting. One of them had a face full of vicissitudes. He was skinny and his eyes were shining with a strange light. He was Ma Jiangming from the Supreme Golden City. Beside him, there were two other people wearing the same clothes as him. On the other side, three people wearing white robes with long beards came leisurely. They stood on the snowy ground. Their figures were elegant and graceful. They had long swords hanging on their waists. A little later, there were two experts from the illusory blood sea who were dressed entirely in purple. Their purple robes were very eye-catching in the snowy ground. There were all the experts from the three holy lands here. The Supreme Golden City had one superior supreme and two supremes. Hermitage also had one superior supreme and two supremes. Although the illusory blood sea had the least people, the two experts from the illusory blood sea were both superior supreme experts. Moreover, they looked exactly the same. They were actually twins. Chapter 621. The killing intent here is extremely dense. But I don't sense any blood at all. How strange. One of the purple-robed men said with a serious expression. He lowered his head and tried his best to sense the abnormality in the air. After a while, he said, there are two different powerful killing intents here. From the looks of it, there are indeed two people fighting here. As for that woman, she did not participate in the battle. Ma Jiangming, does that dog nose of yours have any other uses other than finding women to torture? He was just searching for the aura here when he heard the latter half of Ma Jiangming's words. He could not help but feel extremely unhappy. In truth, the moment they saw that the person who had come here with them was actually this perverted Ma Jiangming, the two purple-robed men were already extremely dissatisfied. Why were they walking together with this kind of trash pervert? Second brother Wan, what do you mean by that? Ma Jiangming rolled his eyes. This daddy likes to torture women, what does that have to do with you? Why are you pointing the spearhead at me for no reason at all? These two purple-robed men were called Ruan Yin and Ruan Yang. They were brothers of the same bloodline. The eldest was only born an hour earlier than the second. The older generation gave these two people a nickname, Yin and Yang softened together. Ruan Yang snorted coldly and said disdainfully, Ma Jiangming, look at how lewd you are when you say those words. This old man doesn't even want to bother with you. What's wrong with this old man's appearance? Lewd? Ma Jiangming yelled angrily. No matter how lewd this old man is, I've never done anything to your sister. What does it have to do with you? What did you say? Ruan Yin and Ruan Yang raised their heads at the same time, their hands on the hilt of their swords as they glared at Ma Jiangming. Ma Jiangming, today, you will pay the price for those words of yours. The leader of the white-robed men hurriedly tried to mediate the situation. What are you all doing? The enemy is right in front of us, and the humiliation of the three holy lands has yet to be avenged. We should be united against a common enemy. Why are you all fighting amongst yourselves with just a few words? If everyone speaks a little less, wouldn't there be no more problems? At the same time, he was feeling extremely gloomy in his heart. Look at this group of people I've been assigned to, they're either perverts or madmen. None of them are willing to submit to the other, and there's no way to coordinate them. As a temporary commander, he didn't have any control over these people at all. It was really fucked up to the extreme. Bai Wu Xian. Who do you think you are? Do you really think you're a commander? Mind your own business. Sure enough, the three of them roared at the white-robed man. Bai Wu Xian's face turned purple as he waved his sleeves angrily and snorted coldly. Fine, fine, fine. Then you guys fight to your heart's content. Fight until both sides are heavily injured, and you won't rest until one of you is dead. It would be best if you meet that brat Chu Chihuan after the fight is over. That way, he can join in the fun and take advantage of the situation. The three of them had almost come to blows several times along the way. It was unknown whether it was because of their bad horoscopes or something else, but they had never stopped fighting from the beginning to the end. Guan Yin snorted coldly. It was clear that he was fearful of the supreme assassin Chu Chihuan. He gave his younger brother a look, then turned around and continued to check the messy footprints on the ground, hoping to find some useful clues. Just at this time, there was a sudden "cheat" sound, and a sharp chi shot towards his back. Guan Yin spun around like a bolt of lightning, grabbing the object in his hand. It was as thin as a strand of hair, and as cold as ice. It melted in a flash. It was actually a tiny ice needle. His face was filled with the vicissitudes of life, but his heart was not old at all. Could it be that this was Ma Jiangming's soul-chasing shadowless needle? Guan Yin flew into a rage and retreated rapidly. With a schwa sound, his sword appeared in his hand, and a round sword light slashed towards Ma Jiangming. Surnamed Ma, you're too despicable. This daddy has already magnanimously let you off, but you still want to stab me in the back. Although Wan Yang did not know what had happened, he could clearly feel the rage in his elder brother's heart when he saw his elder brother turn around and fly into a rage. Without even thinking, he unsheathed his sword and followed behind his elder brother. With a thunderous roar, he slashed towards Ma Jiangming. Although Ma Jiangming had been quarreling with the two Ruan brothers on the way here, he was still able to look at the bigger picture. Moreover, both sides had their own misgivings, so they did not really take action. At this moment, he was completely caught off guard, and did not expect that the two of them would actually attack without any regard for their feelings. Caught off guard, Ma Jiangming was nearly dismembered by the two brothers on the spot. In the time it took for a spark to fly off a piece of flint, he was already drenched in cold sweat. The cotton-padded clothes on his body were split open from top to bottom. Even the unlined shirt inside was split in half, revealing his bony chest. On it, a clear red mark could be seen. It was a wound caused by the sword chi. Just a hair's breadth difference, and his stomach would have been split open. The more he thought about it, the more afraid he became. Ma Jiangming felt as if he had just been on the brink of death, and all the hairs on his body stood on end. In a fit of rage, he roared, "Ruan Yin, Ruan Yang, it was just a battle of tongues, and the two of you actually dared to attack with such killing intent. Do you really think that this old man is afraid of you two brothers?" His hands suddenly swiped at his waist, and a long sword appeared. With a wave of his left hand, several steel needles appeared in his hand. In a fit of rage, he attacked. The Ruan brothers were even more enraged. "Did you think that this daddy didn't know that you were sneaking up on us? So shameless, and you still dare to say that it was just a battle of tongues. Hypocrites to the extreme." Ding ding dang dang, the three of them instantly engaged in battle. This sudden turn of events not only surprised Hermitage by Wu Xian and the others, even Chu Chihuan, who was secretly preparing to act, was stunned. Just what was going on? It was just a battle of tongues, why did they suddenly attack with such killing intent? They were on the same side, fighting each other to the death. What kind of logic was this? Great Assassin Chu had originally made use of the snowstorm to conceal himself and sneak over. He was just about to make a move to kill them. He had also seen that Ma Jiangming and the Ruan brothers did not see eye to eye with each other, so he decided to take them down one by one. Who would have thought that before he could make a move, the three of them would actually start fighting amongst themselves? Furthermore, it was not the kind of fake fight that was used to lure the enemy. Instead, it was a real fight. Each of them was enraged and filled with indignation, as if they were going to fight to the death. With the cultivation of a superior supreme, how could they be so stupid? Not to mention the fact that there was a powerful enemy attacking them at any time. At such a critical moment, they still wanted to kill each other. Chu Chi-hun was truly puzzled. He couldn't understand Ma Jiangming's actions at all. You've already been persuaded to leave. You're just one person, while the other party has two people. Why are you still so persistent? Could it be that this weathered old fellow is really addicted to looking for trouble? I've never seen such a despicable superior suprema, but what he didn't know was that Ma Jiangming was the one who was being wrongly accused. The ice needle that Boss Ruan had been struck by was not from Ma Jiangming at all. It was the work of Jun Moxie and Jun Dashao, who had been hiding in the shadows. Ma Jiangming was completely unaware of this, and he was currently feeling extremely indignant in his heart. Young Master Jun Imo Xia saw that there was a conflict between the three of them. So, how could he not take advantage of this opportunity to stir up trouble and fan the flames, and add fuel to the fire? And, how could he not wish for the world to be in chaos? The greater the conflict between you guys, the better. It would be best if it turned into a life and death grudge. That would be even more satisfying. Fight, fight, fight. It would be best if you all perish together. The two assassins were waiting in the shadows, ready to make their move at any time. Chu Chi-hun made use of everything he could, as well as his own unique cultivation technique. His concealment was flawless. As for Jun Moxie, he had activated the yin-yang escape technique and directly disappeared without a trace. And he had already made his move. And the moment he made his move, the effect was immediate. Extremely good. Ma Jiangming was only one person. Naturally, he wouldn't be able to fight against the Ruan brothers, two supreme-level experts. But how could Jun Moxie allow him to be defeated so easily and extinguish this internal fire that he had worked so hard to ignite? That would be such a waste, and he would be so unwilling. What a waste of their exquisite martial arts. Thus, young Master Jun held a ball of ice in his hand and shot out ice needles one after another. Their trajectories were strange and inexplicable, and their angles were crafty and strange, forcing the Ruan brothers to howl and cry out in pain. Ma Jiangming, who was fighting 1 against 2, became more and more valiant as he fought. He could feel that the Ruan brothers would immediately be thrown into confusion wherever he pointed his sword at them. In an instant, his heroic spirit rose, and he laughed sinisterly. Bai Wu Xian tried to persuade them, but it was to no avail. No one paid any attention to this temporary commander, and he could only watch the show from the side. But even he didn't expect that the battle between the three would become more and more intense. This was especially so for the Ruan brothers. 2 supremes and above, they should have the upper hand in a 2-on-1 battle. But as the battle progressed, they would often be on the losing end. Their hatred for Ma Jiangming had sunk into their bones, they could not afford to lose this much face. Their necks, thighs, and other parts of their bodies had been pierced by the ice needles for an unknown number of times. Even though the two of them had achieved a high level of Xian cultivation, it was unlikely that they would sustain any serious injuries. However, the piercing pain was unbearable for them. That was not all, but their buttocks were constantly being pierced by the ice needles. How could they not be enraged? Those places were not fatal, but they were extremely humiliating. This was not killing them, but toying with them. Thus, the two brothers' eyes turned red. At the start, they only wanted to teach Ma Jiangming a lesson. But the more they fought, the angrier they became. Gradually, their killing intent surged, and they would not rest until they were dead. The cause of this killing intent was actually very simple. Huanyang's buttocks had been pierced by another needle. But this time, the location of the needle could be said to be extremely narrow. It had actually pierced directly into his anus. As everyone knew, the flesh in that area was extremely tender. Furthermore, it was a place where Xian Qi could not protect. Thus, the pain was even more unbearable than being cut by a knife. Thus, Huanyang, who was unlucky enough to be hit, immediately jumped up with a loud cry. Besides, the temperature in that area was extremely high. Before he could even deal with it himself, it had already melted inside, snow and blood flowed out of his body, and Second Master Wan looked like he was on his period. Furthermore, it was his first period. He was in an extremely sorry state. His entire crotch was cold, slippery, and wet. What a disgrace. Chapter 622. Huanyang was like an enraged lion that had a red-hot iron rod shoved into its buttocks. With a loud roar, his entire body seemed to swell up by an entire size in an instant. The jade crown on his head exploded with a peng sound, and his long hair fluttered wildly in the air. It was as if the seaweed at the bottom of the sea had suddenly encountered a hurricane. Despicable and filthy Ma Jiangming, you despicable bastard. You treacherous and despicable villain, die for this daddy. Second young Master Wan roared with bloodshot eyes. His eyes were wide open, and he was completely focused on attacking, not defending at all. He was in a state of desperation. Opening wide and attacking crazily. Success. Jun Moxie left the battlefield, feeling extremely pleased with himself. From the looks of it, the three of them would not rest until they fought to the death. This young master's goal has been achieved. How was it? This young master's methods are not bad, right? Did you understand? Jun Moxie transmitted his voice proudly to Chu Chihuan. It was as if he was planning a strategy in a tent, and the outcome of the battle had been decided 1,000 miles away. In any case, one could tell from his voice that he was extremely lewd. What? You're saying that the internal strife between the three of them was caused by you? Chu Chihuan was startled, and his figure was almost exposed. At this time, he was using a unique technique to hide behind a withered branch of a small dogwood tree, preparing to attack at any time. Borrowing the cover of the snowstorm, no one actually discovered that there was a killing god hiding just 20 zhang away. Of course, this young master only used a small trick, and the three of them immediately started to fight amongst themselves. Jun Moxie continued to transmit his voice proudly. How did you do it? Chu Chihuan was extremely curious. This was no longer a trick, it was a miracle. He had silently caused them to fight amongst themselves, and the most terrifying thing was that this young master had not even been exposed yet. I can fight with my wits, why use brute force? This young master has always been resourceful and resourceful. This young master merely imitated Ma Jiangming's methods of using hidden weapons, then pinched a handful of snow needles and pierced it into that second brother Ruan's chrysanthemum, and they immediately started fighting amongst themselves. Ha ha ha, how lively. Jun Moxie laughed proudly. In the anus? What chrysanthemum? Chu Chihuan was, after all, a native of the Xian continent. He did not understand the meaning of this highly civilized language. He thought to himself, do people have chrysanthemums on their bodies? How could it be so useful if it was penetrated into the anus? Then he would have to carry a few hundred chrysanthemums with him in the future. It's in the bedroom, do you understand? How ignorant and ill-informed. How dare you force a famous scholar like me to use such disgusting words? Jun Moxie laughed obscenely and said happily, don't you think that the shape of that place looks like a blooming daisy? Remember, from now on, that place will be called Chrysanthemum. How civilized. In that instant, Chu Chihuan almost choked to the point that his internal organs were on fire. This daddy really did not pay much attention to it. Besides, which man would pay attention to that place for no reason? Wouldn't that be so bored that his balls hurt? Just a look at it would make him feel so disgusted that he wouldn't be able to eat for 3 days. Especially when he was looking at his own, no wonder that Wang Yang suddenly went crazy while he was fighting. So that was the case. Long live understanding. Who would feel good when that place was suddenly poked by someone? This was not just a matter of pain, it was also a matter of the face of a superior supreme expert. Such an expert was poked in the anus. The anus? Chu Chihuan suddenly felt that he was very lucky. If that brat had also done that to him during the battle earlier. Thinking of this famous supreme assassin felt his anus tighten. Then, a chill shot up from his tailbone all the way to his neck. In that instant, his hair stood on end, and he did not dare to think any further. It was too frightening. Just thinking about it was already like that, and that second brother one had suffered a solid hit. Heavens great earth just what kind of person is this brat to have so many despicable methods The situation of the battle changed in an instant, and in the blink of an eye, the situation had already reversed. Ma Jiangming, who did not know that he had reinforcements, was actually fighting 1 against 2. He could not help but feel extremely pleased with himself as he mocked, ha ha ha, as expected of the yin yang softness. You two brothers truly live up to your nickname. Trash like this actually dares to call yourselves superior supremes. Looks like the illusory blood sea really does not have anyone else. No wonder that Chu Chihuan was able to kill 3 superior supremes of your illusory blood sea in 1 move. So the so-called superior supremes of your illusory blood sea are actually this kind of trash. No wonder, no wonder. As the saying goes, retribution comes the fastest. Following Wang Yang's rage, Ma Jiangming suddenly felt the pressure multiply. Without Jun Moxie secretly restraining them, the 2 Wan brothers were like 2 ferocious tigers that had just been released from their cages, roaring and launching a massive counterattack. Ma Jiangming had suddenly fallen into a whirlpool of death where he could attack and defend with ease. The 3 of them were all experts of the same level. 2 against 1, Ma Jiangming was already at an absolute disadvantage. Furthermore, because he had been so relaxed earlier, he had let down his guard.
Now, the side with the advantage in numbers had taken the initiative to fight with their lives on the line. From the start, Ma Jiangming had only wanted to teach the 2 brothers a lesson, and that was all. The difference in his attitude had directly led to the outcome of the battle. With a pang sound, Ma Jiangming was thrown into a fluster for a moment before he managed to block the sharp swords of the 2 brothers with great difficulty. However, he was still kicked viciously, and his entire body was sent flying with a so sound. Ma Jiangming borrowed the momentum to soar into the sky, roaring loudly, "Wan brothers, could it be that you really want to fight to the death with this old man today? You've been causing trouble for no reason, and this old man has already tolerated enough. You should know when to advance and when to retreat. Lest things become difficult between our 2 holy lands, fuck your grandmother, you bastards still want to be a human. Just wait to become a ghost." Wang Yang roared loudly, not letting up in the slightest. His body spun rapidly on the snowy ground, and the thick layer of snow seemed to be lifted up as well. A dazzling sword light suddenly formed a long dragon, its entire body covered in dazzling lightning. Man and sword as one, it pierced towards Ma Jiangming. Wan Yin was afraid that his brother would die, so he also followed suit and rushed forward. If he didn't kill Ma Jiangming, he wouldn't rest. This was already a situation where he wouldn't rest until he was dead. The situation changed in an instant, completely out of everyone's expectations. A moment ago, Ma Jiangming had still held the upper hand. But now, he was actually facing the frightening sword chi of 2 men as one. Life and death were separated by a hair's breadth. Ma Jiangming's hair stood on end, and he was so angry that he almost vomited blood. "Fuck your mother, so you 2 brats really wanted to kill this old man. You even used man and sword as one. Do you really think this old man is made of mud? This old man will bet this move with you 2 brothers. Let's see who will emerge victorious." The long sword danced crazily in the air, and a strong gust of wind rose from the tip of the sword. With a single slash, a woo sound rang out, shaking the entire sky. 10,000 rays of sword light shot down from the sky. At the same time, his left hand continued to wave, and bright rays of light continuously shot out from his hand, disappearing in a flash. This was Ma Jiangming's true killing move, and also the reason why the Ruan brothers had always been suspicious of it, soul-chasing shadowless needle. The three of them were like meteors crashing into the earth, flying at their highest speed. Moreover, they were using all of their killing moves to determine life and death. The hearts of the Ruan brothers were filled with shame and indignation, but how could Ma Jiangming's heart not be filled with anger and resentment?
Just what did I do to you guys? Wasn't it just a joke that went a little overboard? Are you guys that bad at jokes? Then why are you still in the pugilistic world? To actually want to kill this old man just because of a single sentence, the three of them used a terrifying aura of irreconcilable hatred as they clashed fiercely against each other without any room for negotiation. Bai Wu Xian had been watching the entire time. At the start, the three of them were only attacking and defending, so he was naturally not too worried. But in the blink of an eye, the three of them had already engaged in a life-and-death battle. This sudden turn of events was completely out of his expectations, and his eyes almost bulged out of their sockets. Just as he was about to shout out to stop them and even make a move to separate the three of them actually used man and sword as one. This old man really has 8 lifetimes worth of bad luck to be your temporary commander. To be in the same team as these two groups of people, it was already a miracle that he hadn't died from anger until now. Fuck you girls, do you really have to fight to the death at this critical juncture? Where is the demeanor of an expert? Where is the bigger picture? He roared in anger. Fight! Fight! If we fight to the death, this old man will finally be able to rest in peace. You're already a fucking 100 years old, but you're still so troublesome. Apart from the 3 people on the battlefield and Bai Wu Xian, the other 4 people stared unblinkingly at the 3 experts fighting with their lives on the line. Everyone felt a chill run down their spines. These 4 people only had the cultivation of a supreme being, they were not strong enough to participate in a higher-level battle. Right at this time, something strange happened again. A cold light suddenly flashed out from the snow like a bolt of lightning. Almost as soon as it appeared, it pierced through the abdomen of the Hermitage Supremacy expert, piercing right through his crotch. An abnormally powerful Xian Qi instantly blasted apart the internal organs of the Hermitage expert. At the same time, the sword light suddenly disappeared, and with another flash of cold light, another Supremacy expert was chopped in half at the waist. Following that, the cold light flashed again, piercing towards Bai Wu Xian's neck like a boat sailing on the current. All done in one go. These 3 swords might sound slow in description, but in truth, they had all happened in an instant. 2 experts had fallen to the ground, and the temporary commander Bai Wu Xian's life was also in danger. At this time, Bai Wu Xian was so angry that his chest was about to explode. But at this time, he suddenly felt a chill run down his spine. Relying on the shocking intuition of a supremacy expert, he charged forward without hesitation. But a sharp pain came from the back of his head, and a deep gash of blood appeared from his neck to the top of his head. Even his skull had suffered a heavy injury, and his brain was just a hair's breadth away from bursting out. Fresh blood sprayed out from the back of his head like a mist, dyeing the snow and the sky a beautiful color. In another direction, a dreamlike color suddenly appeared. Although it was hazy, its speed was like the fury of a lightning god. Chapter 623. The 2 Supreme Xian experts from the Supreme Golden City saw that Ma Jiangming had fallen into a disadvantageous position and were just about to raise their swords to help when they suddenly felt something flash in front of them. Before they could even raise their guard, one of them suddenly fell to the ground with a strange expression on his face. A bloody hole had already appeared behind his neck. The other person was shocked and panicked, screaming madly as he tried to dodge. But how could he make it in time? With a schwa sound, a sword slashed down from his shoulder all the way to his abdomen. The steaming hot viscera poured out onto the ice-cold snowy ground like a flood released from the floodgates. Bai Wu Xian howled miserably and explosively. The two supreme Xian experts behind him who had already suffered fatal injuries but were still alive also howled miserably in disbelief. On the other side, one of the two supreme Xian experts from the Supreme Golden City had fallen to the ground, while the other looked at the bloody guts on the ground and howled miserably in extreme fear. At this moment, he had not died yet. He could still feel the icy coldness of his guts falling onto the snow. This was a kind of extreme fear that could only be experienced in nightmares. But it had actually happened in real life. With their Xian Qi and experience, they should not have been ambushed so easily, and they did not even have the strength to retaliate. But the battle between Ma Jiangming and the Ruan brothers had turned into a life-and-death battle, and it had already attracted all their attention. Even now, the few of them were still pondering in their hearts. Just what was going on? Why did it suddenly turn into a life-and-death enmity? At such a critical moment, the two King of Assassins had appeared out of nowhere and attacked from behind, catching them completely off guard. Not to mention retaliating, the two most unlucky people were still in a daze until their deaths. The three people in the air discovered the tragic scene on the ground at the same time, and their hearts burned with anxiety. But they could no longer stop their attacks. The battle had already reached a critical juncture, and even if they wanted to stop, it was already too late. Hong! A shocking explosion rang out. Three people, three superior Supreme Xian experts, exploded in the air with their lives on the line. Three loud roars rang out at the same time, and three figures fell from three different directions. As they fell, they spat out mouthfuls of blood. All three of them had suffered heavy injuries. Especially Ma Jiangming, his injuries were the most severe. In the end, he was fighting 1 against 2, and there was a huge gap in their strength. At this moment, the emotions of Ma Jiangming, Ruan Yin, and Ruan Yang had reached an indescribable level. Astonishment, anger, pain, grief, disbelief, these complicated expressions instantly froze on the faces of the three people who were falling through the air. For powerful existences like them who stood at the peak of the world, along with the growth of their cultivation, their self-restraint and bearing would increase along with it. Normally, even if it wasn't that they didn't show their emotions, it was still more or less the same. It was difficult to find any of these expressions on their faces, but at this moment, so many complicated negative expressions were actually displayed on the 7 emotions, and it was easy to imagine how hideous their faces were. But even such a ferocious expression could not express the complex emotions they were feeling at this moment. It was even to the extent that at this moment, they'd completely forgotten to roar explosively, and they'd forgotten the hysterical roars they ought to emit from their pain. The blood fell from the sky and turned into streaks of scarlet light. However, in the eyes of the three people, the scene was the same. It was as if the whole world was frozen in that instant. Impossible! How did things turn out like this? The wretched cries of his companions, the sorrowful cries of his comrades, the wriggling body on the ground, the bloody pile of internal organs still steaming hot, the wound on Bai Wu Xian's chest continued to bleed profusely, but he still did not collapse. In truth, of the 8 experts who'd just arrived, the only one who could still be considered to have any battle strength was the injured Bai Wu Xian. Although his injuries were not light, they were not fatal. However, the intense pain he was feeling was something that even a superior supreme expert would not be able to endure. The pain on his neck and scalp was secondary. The most important thing was that his skull had been slashed open, and that kind of pain had penetrated deep into his bones. Penetrated deep into his soul. Bai Wu Xian screamed shrilly, using all the strength in his body to vent the pain in his mind and body. At the same time, it was also a warning. He did not even turn around to look at the person who'd injured him. Because he knew very clearly that if he turned around, he would no longer have the chance to escape death. With a shrill cry, he directly activated the man and sword as one technique, turning into a streak of light that tore through the snowy skies. With a brilliant bloody light, he fled for his life. At this moment, Bai Wu Xian's speed had already reached the peak of this world. With just a flash, his figure had completely disappeared from everyone's sight. This kind of extreme escaping speed that stimulated all the potential of the human body was something that even Mei Shuiyan would not be able to catch up to. The man and sword as one technique was an extremely powerful killing technique. From ancient times until now, Bai Wu Xian was probably the first to use this technique to escape with his life. In other words, he was the first person to do so. Even when Bai Wu Xian's figure had completely disappeared, Jun Moxie still did not show himself. In the air, only that shrill cry still reverberated in the air. In fact, it seemed like it was getting louder and louder. Outside the mountain valley, echoing cries could be heard from all directions. The experts of the three holy lands continued to pour in to provide support. The Ruan brothers and Ma Jiangming finally landed on the ground. Although that clash between them had been real, without the slightest bit of fakery, and their bodies were covered in blood and their muscles were twisted and twisted, the three of them who knew that they were in an unknown perilous situation immediately stood up as soon as they landed. Although there was still a trace of blood at the corner of their mouths, their bodies were still as straight as a ramrod. Chu Chihuan's figure flashed again. In the instant that they landed and stood up, a dreamlike sword light suddenly appeared. Under Ruan Yin's wide eyes, the sword turned into a streak of light and pierced straight into his chest. This was Chu Chihuan's all-out attack of death. This attack of Chu Chihuan's was extremely profound. Ruan Yin was not the weakest of the three, nor was he the most heavily injured, making him the easiest target. However, Chu Chihuan had purposely chosen him. The reason was the exact opposite. Of the three of them, only Ruan Yin still had the strength to fight. He was also the one with the lightest injuries. Although his injuries were not light, he was still a superior supreme expert. Ruan Yin had just landed and stood up. He had not even had the time to catch his breath. This was the best opportunity to kill him. As for the other two, they were already half dead. As long as Ruan Yin could be eliminated first, the other two would naturally have no chance of survival. Thus, Chu Chihun did not even have the time to catch his breath. With the remaining power from killing two people in a row, he once again became one with his sword and rushed over to kill with one strike, a one-hit kill. If he waited for Ruan Yin to catch his breath, it would not be so easy to kill him anymore. This was the experience and keen senses of this supreme assassin. This sword did not hold back at all. Just as Chu Chihuan had predicted, after the ultimate fight between two superior supreme experts, Ruan Yin, who had been through a shocking change, was indeed unable to avoid this sudden attack of death. He did not even have the time to catch his breath. Just as he stood up, the long sword had already pierced through his body with a bright sword light and a strong murderous aura. As the long sword entered Ruan Yin's body, the ferocious sword aura wreaked havoc in his body. The huge force even sent Ruan Yin's body flying backwards. Ruan Yin did not disappoint the strength of a superior supreme expert. Knowing that he was going to die, he let out a desperate roar at the last moment. His voice was tragic and shook the surroundings. Both his hands struck out with all his might, using all the remaining strength he had. He landed 4 consecutive palm strikes on Chu Chihuan's body. He only managed to land 4 palm strikes. Because, in the next moment, his body had already exploded from the impact of Chu Chihuan's sword aura, turning into a bloody mess and disappearing from the world forever. Chu Chihun spat out a mouthful of fresh blood. After all, the final strike of a supreme being was not so easy to endure. In the air, Ruan Yin's 4 palms, which were on the brink of death, sent him tumbling a few times like a ball, and the autumn dew invincible sword almost flew out of his hand. Ruan Yang cried out in fear, "Big brother." Suddenly, his body shook, and he felt a chill in his chest. He looked down in surprise, and saw a shiny sword tip protruding out of his chest. A strange expression appeared on his face, and his eyes were filled with disbelief. "I was hit by a sword. How is this possible?" The shiny sword tip flashed past and disappeared. Ruan Yin roared madly and charged forward, intending to perish together with his assailant. However, his attack landed on thin air. As the last bit of his strength left him, his body was pushed back a few steps due to inertia, and he fell weakly to the ground. His legs turned soft, and he knelt on the ground. His arms swayed a few times, and his body suddenly fell backwards. His knees touched the ground, and his head fell backwards, actually touching the snow and his own heel. His entire body bent like a bow, and his eyes bulged out in anger as he suddenly stopped moving. The intense resentment in his heart made him want to see who had killed him before he died. To actually die in such a difficult position. However, he was destined to be disappointed. Because at this moment, Jun Moxie was already standing in front of his next target, Ma Jiangming. Of the three, Ruan Yin's injuries were the lightest. Thus, Chu Chihuan was the first to attack. Ruan Yang was the second, so Jun Moxie was the second. As for Ma Jiangming, he was the one with the heaviest injuries. He was also the only one of the three who had lost the ability to fight. Fighting against two experts of the same level by himself, it would be strange if he was not heavily injured. There was nothing to worry about. Ma Jiangming struggled to maintain his standing posture. It was obvious that he was extremely weak, as if a gust of wind could blow him over. He coughed lightly, and blood flowed continuously from his mouth. His entire body was covered with dozens of wounds, and even his face was covered with scars. From the looks of it, his face looked even more ancient. Jun Moxie? So it's you. Ma Jiangming laughed bitterly. His body swayed, and his eyes were lifeless. You've really surprised this old man. Where's your lover? Ma Jiangming, stop pretending. Jun Moxie looked at him in Lengleng's eyes. Although your injuries were the heaviest, that is only when compared to the Ruan brothers. Your true injuries are far from what you've displayed. Trying to play tricks in front of me is useless. Also, a month of hard work, 27 consecutive days of high-intensity eruption, and it's all gone at the end of the month. I'm not resigned. I'm not resigned. I'm not resigned. Also, a month of hard work, 27 consecutive days of high-intensity eruption, and it's all gone at the end of the month. I'm not resigned. I'm not resigned. I'm not resigned. Also, a month of hard work, 27 consecutive days of high-intensity eruption, and it's all gone at the end of the month. I'm not resigned. I'm not resigned. I'm not resigned.
Chapter 624. You're lucky. You actually managed to take advantage of a loophole. Ma Jiangming was so angry that his entire face had turned purple, and he looked even more sinister and frightening. If it weren't for these two bastards causing trouble for no reason and suddenly acting like they were having an epileptic fit, how could you have succeeded so easily? The heavens really toy with people, to this extent. This old man actually got together with those two bastards. It must be the will of the heavens. However, this old man managed to escape after those two bastards. This battle is this old man's victory. The will of the heavens? I can't help but admire your stupidity. You actually don't know how you died even when you're about to die. Do you think that you've won against those dead brothers? Idiot. Jun Moxie laughed loudly and raised his sword. Die. This young master has no interest in wasting time with you. Could it be that this was all you're doing? Ma Jiangming's eyes suddenly widened, and his expression slowly changed from one of shock to one of malevolence. So it was you. So it was you. Die for this old man, he roared loudly and suddenly flew up. The sky was filled with silver light, and a streak of purple lightning shot out. The momentum was not weak at all. Jun Moxie snorted coldly. His body moved slightly, and he actually disappeared from sight. When he reappeared, he was already behind Ma Jiangming, and he slashed out with his sword. Ma Jiangming's body suddenly leapt up, but it seemed like he was unable to dodge in time. Although he managed to avoid the fatal point on his back, the sword brushed past his legs and pierced into his crotch. Speaking of which, even June Moxie hadn't expected that this sword would actually succeed so easily. He had already prepared several moves, and was prepared to react at any time. Even if a Superior Supreme was heavily injured, how could it be so easy to kill a Superior Supreme in a frontal confrontation? After all, a frontal confrontation was different from a sneak attack. However, this sword had directly castrated Ma Jiangming, and it went so smoothly that even June Moxie was shocked. This kind of injury would be difficult for any man to endure. Even a Superior Supreme would not be an exception. In the end, that was the most painful part of a man. However, a sudden change occurred. Just as June Moxie thought that he had succeeded, Ma Jiangming, who had clearly been struck in his vitals, suddenly retreated at full speed. It was as if he did not feel the sword at all, as if he did not even feel the slightest bit of pain. With a backhand slap, he landed a heavy blow on June Moxie's shoulder. June Moxie was greatly surprised. He didn't expect that this guy, as a man's most important part, could still be so vigorous and fierce. He was really a fierce person.
A cracking sound came from his shoulder, and the bones seemed to have been dislocated. With a muffled groan, he was sent flying with his sword. To his surprise, he discovered that the sword was as cool as water and there was not a single trace of blood on it. He could not help but widen his eyes. As he flew backwards, he could not help but exclaim in surprise, "Fuck me. So you don't have anything down there." A man's greatest pain was indeed something that no man could endure. The only ones who could endure it were those who were not men. Ma Jiangming laughed heartily as he chased after them with a sinister look on his face. "That's right. I don't have anything down there. You didn't expect this, right? Ha ha ha." He was laughing so loudly, as if it was a glorious thing to be proud of that he didn't have anything down there. He even seemed a little proud of himself. June Moxie could not understand what was going on at this moment. In the distance, Chu Chihuan, who was meditating, could not help but retch. As a man, he was actually so proud of himself when he didn't have anything down there. No wonder this fellow loved to torture beautiful women to death. So that was the reason. It was because he was helpless in front of beautiful women. June Moxie was both angry and amused at the same time. No wonder this fellow was still able to retaliate. His shoulder was burning with pain, but he still laughed heartily. "Fuck, so you don't have anything down there. It's rare for you to be so proud of yourself. You really are a fucking genius." At this time, Ma Jiangming had already caught up to him. With a sinister smile, he said, "So what if this daddy doesn't have it? It's precisely because I don't have that thing that I've saved this daddy's life. You do have it, but it's going to be wasted. This daddy will make sure that you won't be able to use it even once in the future." He attacked fiercely. Swords, silver needles, fists, and kicks rained down like a torrential storm. June Moxie laughed heartily, and his entire body disappeared inexplicably in the midst of his laughter. Right in front of Ma Jiangming, under his widened eyes, Chu Yang had mysteriously disappeared without a trace. Ma Jiangming's sure-kill attack had been unleashed with a honked sound, but the person in front of him had already disappeared. He could not help but be startled. Turning around, he raised his guard. Suddenly, he felt a heart-wrenching pain in his crotch. With a strange cry, his entire body was sent flying into the air, flailing about wildly. June Mo Xia had ruthlessly kicked Ma Jiangming's crotch from below. The huge force of the kick had sent Ma Jiangming's body flying into the air. Ma Jiangming didn't even have the time to scream before another invisible kick landed on the same spot. In the air, June Moxie shouted coldly, "I'll let you have nothing down there. I'll let you be fucking proud that you don't have anything down there. 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 You don't have anything down there." Following a series of curses, kick after kick landed on the same spot. Ma Jiangming's body continued to be kicked upwards, and his lower body also continued to be kicked fiercely, all of them landing on the same spot. Not to mention that Ma Jiangming didn't have anything down there to begin with. even if he did, he wouldn't be able to recognize it now. At the very least, he wouldn't be able to recognize what it was. Below, Chu Chihuan's mouth was wide open, and he sucked in a breath of cold air. He watched as Ma Jiangming shot upwards like a rocket. He was already over 100 zhang above the ground, and he was still persevering to rise higher into the sky. Hearing the continuous sounds of kicks, Chu Chihuan suddenly felt as if the roots of his teeth had gone soft. From the strength of these kicks, this old man with a face full of vicissitudes of life would probably die within 2 more kicks. It must have been tough for Jun Moxie to actually kick him 200 times in one go. This guy who doesn't have anything down there is a pervert. That guy who has something down there is also a pervert. Motherfuckers are all more perverted than this daddy. This was the conclusion that Chu Chihuan came to. With a so sound, Jun Moxie appeared in front of him, and said hurriedly, "Quick, dodge, the people from the 3 holy lands are coming again. There are at least 100 of them this time." Just now, he had risen to the sky, and he had clearly seen the silhouettes of people flying over with the speed of the wind, more than 100 people. This was definitely a terrifying force. With their current strength, they definitely wouldn't be able to contend against such a strong force. Chu Chihuan was still in a state of shock. He raised his head and looked at the sky. Ma Jiangming was still flying upwards, and he had already shrunk to the size of a soybean. Then, he looked at Jun Moxie in front of him, and was still puzzled. How did this brat suddenly come down? That guy who doesn't have anything down there is still flying up like a little bird that was beaten by him. How did he suddenly appear on the ground? Jun Dashao pulled Chu Chihuan up, and rushed into the snow cave where Mei Shuiyan and Dongfang Wen Xian were hiding. There was no time for him to say anything, and he immediately activated the power of water. Snow was formed by water, and in the end, it was still a form of water. The snow under the 4 of them suddenly rose into the air, revealing the solid ground. The 4 of them landed on the ground at the same time. Before Chu Chihuan had the time to be surprised, Jun Moxie pressed down with his hands, and Chu Chihuan felt that he was falling down endlessly, as if there was a natural bottomless abyss below him. "Are you trying to kill me? What's going on? Isn't this too fantastical?" Swoosh, 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 swoosh. In the outside world, countless figures were flashing everywhere. Just as Jun Moxie and Chu Chihuan disappeared, they arrived at the snowy ground where a fierce battle had just happened. From afar, there were still many figures rushing over as if they were old men. On the snowy ground, everything was red. Fresh blood was dripping everywhere. The 2 halves of his body were separated by a long distance. His arms were still in a crawling position. There were also pieces of flesh scattered evenly on the snowy ground. Wan Yang was using that weird posture to support himself on the snowy ground. He was already completely dead. There was another person with his stomach full of intestines and organs hanging out. Obviously, he was in extreme pain before he died. From the looks of it, the other half of his body had struggled for a long time, because the other half of his body was still 3 zhang away. In the middle, there was a thin intestine that had been pulled out, and there seemed to still be some heat left. Such a scene, even hell would not be so cruel, right? Everyone stared blankly at the scene in front of them. At the same time, they felt their stomachs churning and their Adam's apple bobbing up and down, as if they were swallowing something. But their faces were filled with hatred, and their eyes were filled with endless hatred. The people from the 3 holy lands had finally arrived. There were actually close to 150 people. And this was only those who were nearby. There were still quite a number of people who had rushed over without hearing the news. The different attire of the 3 holy lands was especially dazzling on the snowy ground. Cruel. This supreme assassin Chu Chihuan is truly vicious and evil to the extreme. If we don't get rid of him, the pugilistic world will not be at peace. On the side of the hermitage, an old man with a snowy white beard looked at the scene in front of him with pity and sighed deeply. Second master is right. Chu Chihuan actually dared to torture the people of our 3 holy lands like this. If we catch him, we will definitely cut him into pieces and grind his bones into ashes. The one who spoke was precisely Zi Jinghong. At this moment, his face was a little twisted. Looking at Wan Yang of the illusory blood sea dying in such a strange manner, the anger and grief in his heart had already reached the limit. In order to encircle and kill Chu Chihuan, the illusory blood sea had already lost 5 superior supreme experts. At this moment, this lawless and resourceful illusory blood sea looked at the benevolent old man in front of him with a hint of fear and evasion in his eyes. It was as if his soul was trembling. The person whom he called second master was the leader of the Hermitage's operation this time. Obviously, the Hermitage was really angry this time, and he was really hurt. They actually sent out this human king who was second only to the palace lord. This second master had a benevolent look and a sincere face. In fact, he even looked a little wooden. His eyes were full of compassion for the state of the universe and the fate of mankind. At a glance, he looked like a typical good person. If there was a story of a farmer and a snake in this world, then everyone would believe that the farmer in the story was him. He was really too kind, too honest. This kind of person would definitely be easy to talk to, very soft-hearted, and very understanding of others. In summary, this person was definitely very gullible. This was the first impression of everyone who saw him for the first time. Chapter 625. Third Watch. This person was a standard gentleman who could be deceived. However, those who were familiar with this person knew that he was an extremely venomous rattlesnake. A person who looked like a gentleman was never a real gentleman. He was more hypocritical than a crocodile and more ruthless than a wolf. Blood-handed gentleman, good dead soul, these were his nicknames. His name was very kind, it was called Jinsibe. This name was kind and funny, but no one in the world dared to laugh at it. They did not even dare to laugh behind their backs. This was because Jinsibe was not merciful at all. 200 years ago, there was a city lord who offended him. He went to the city lord's door to denounce him, but he was surrounded by the army. In a fit of rage, Jinsibe went on a killing spree for 3 days and 3 nights. With his own strength, he completed the magnificent feat of slaughtering a city. After all, although the city was small, it still had a population of nearly 100,000 people in it. There were soldiers, xian cultivators, officials, and commoners among them. This Jinsibe did not distinguish between right and wrong and killed them all. The old, the weak, the women, and the children were not spared. 3 days later, the city became a dead city. Not even a single dog managed to escape. Not a single survivor was spared. The most outrageous thing was that after the killing, this man did not show mercy. He took a big vat filled with human blood and wrote a few words on the city wall. The heavens are merciful, I am merciful too, I am merciful in the name of enforcing justice. Slaughtering 100,000 people and claiming to be merciful in the name of enforcing justice. This was the biggest joke in the world. An ordinary expert would be tired after killing a few dozen people, but this Jinsibe did not even bat an eyelid when he slaughtered 100,000 people. He even thought that he was doing a good deed and was merciful. Truly merciful. The entire Jianghu was in turmoil because of this matter. Countless experts swore to kill him, but his xian qi was too profound and almost no one could stop him. In the end, the palace master of the elusive world of immortals personally took action and defeated him. Then, he disappeared without a trace. It turned out that he had joined the elusive world of immortals and had taken on such an important role. Jinsibe stroked his beard and sighed sorrowfully, that Chu Chi-hun has committed such a perverse act, we naturally cannot let him off. We are patrolling on behalf of the heavens, so we should enforce justice on behalf of the heavens and eliminate this calamity for the human world. A middle-aged man wearing a tall hat and a hemp robe spoke. His face was long and narrow, like a horse's face, but also like a donkey's face. His eyes were long and narrow, like 2 slits. Right now, these 2 slits were flashing with a bloodthirsty light. Lang Lang looked at Jinsibe and sneered, "Old Jin, are you trying to be a gentleman again? Are you going to be merciful again?" This person did not have any scruples when facing a peerless killer like Shen Sibei. It was obvious that Shen Sibei was on equal footing, but Shen Sibei was not angry at all. This person was the third castellan of the Supreme Golden City, and also one of the leaders of the Blood Sea. Absolute Heaven, Absolute Earth, and Absolute World, Du Ju. His name was Du Ju. This name was very extreme, and the person with this name was also very extreme. He was exactly like his name. Not only was he ruthless to his enemies, he was even more ruthless to himself. It was said that in order to practice his swordsmanship, when he was tired and dissatisfied, he stabbed himself in the thigh. Until he was satisfied. If a person could be so ruthless to himself, one could imagine how he behaved in the world. Du Ju and Shen Sibei were the true pinnacle of the world, venerable ones. The compassionate venerable Shen Sibei, and the heartless venerable Du Ju. Whoever met Shen Sibei was bound to be merciful, whoever met Du Ju meant that he had reached the end of his life. A gentleman's virtue is shown in every word and action. How is this showing off? When it's time to be merciful, we will naturally enforce justice on behalf of heaven, and return peace to the world, Shen Sibei sighed and said solemnly. Along with his white hair and white beard, he looked solemn and solemn, as if he was holy and inviolable. But when everyone heard his words, all of them shuddered without exception. At this moment, the wind whistled in the sky, and a blurry shadow fell from the vast sky like a meteor. The speed was as fast as a meteor, like lightning. Du Ju's eyes flashed, and he suddenly shouted. His body did not move, but he floated up and went up to meet the attack. His palm was like a knife, and it was suffused with the color of blood. He did not even blink, and with a swoosh 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 swoosh, he struck more than 10 palm knives. Every knife hit its mark. Not a single knife missed its mark. The person who had fallen from the sky had been chopped into 17 or 18 pieces, scattering in all directions. Good skill. Venerable Du's palm knife is so handsome. This move is indeed extraordinary. Several people cheered in unison. At the same time, they were flattering him. However, Du Ju had already fallen down. His face was flushed red, and it looked very ugly. He was a little angry, but also a little depressed. With a pang sound, a ball-like head smashed into the snow, then bounced up and rolled a few times. His face was facing the sky, and his eyes were wide open. He was as thin as a skeleton, and his face was full of wrinkles and vicissitudes. It's Ma Jiangming. Why did he run up to the sky? We've been here for quite a while, and he only came down now. How high did he jump? The people of the Supreme Golden City cried out in alarm. They were full of questions. This unfortunate person who had been dismembered and beheaded by their third city lord was actually an expert on their side. However, they did not dare to say anything else. They did not even dare to go over to take a look. Everyone had a strange expression on their faces. That was because Du Ju's face had turned even darker. His donkey-like face seemed to have become even longer, and his body seemed to be emitting a murderous aura. He had elegantly leaped up and struck with all his strength. He had wanted to show off his might in front of everyone, but he had ended up chopping his own people into pieces. One could imagine how embarrassed Venerable Du was right now. Ha ha ha. Venerable Du's palm knife is so handsome. With a wave of his hand, he chopped this merciless man with a face full of vicissitudes of life into 17 or 18 pieces. This kind of skill is truly earth-shattering. Amazing. It is indeed amazing. Worthy of being called Venerable Du Ju. Shen Sibei smiled amiably. He spoke in a solemn tone, as if he was praising Venerable Du Ju from the bottom of his heart. There was not a trace of ridicule in his tone. Du Ju snorted coldly. Suddenly, he tilted his palm and raised it in front of his chest. A sharp palm knife went straight towards Shen Sibei without making a sound. Shen Sibei laughed loudly. He waved his sleeves, and with a schwa sound, Du Ju's palm knife suddenly changed direction, and cut deeply into the snow-covered ground. Shen Sibei and Du Ju were startled at the same time. They looked thoughtfully at the snow-covered ground under their feet. "You guys, collect the corpses on the ground first. Isn't it too pitiful to leave these corpses lying in the wilderness? It's better to bury them in peace. Don't avoid the filth, the dead are the most important," Jinsibe casually instructed in a pleasant manner. His face was full of grief. A few people in white immediately came out from behind him, and quickly collected the corpses on the ground. "Everyone, let's work together and clear all the snow in this slanting valley," Du Ju and Langleng ordered. The snow in the entire valley was as thick as a mountain. However, Du Ju did not hesitate at all, and gave the order. It was very easy, as if he was saying, "Just sweep the dust here, it's so easy." 10 highly skilled martial artists from the Great Golden City stood up at the same time. Their bodies slowly expanded, and suddenly, they let out a muffled groan and struck out their palms at the same time. The violent gale turned into a huge shovel and swept up the thick layer of snow in a radius of several hundred feet. Then, another 40 to 50 people moved at the same time. With a loud bang, a huge layer of snow was lifted up and flew high up into the sky. Then, it fell outside of the slanting valley. Translators' thoughts Unimon _ Unimon _ Unimon _ Unimon _ Unimon _ Such a large area of snow would weigh more than 10 million pounds. It was actually thrown out just like that. Black soil could be seen on the ground. There was a difference of 3 feet between the soil and the snow that everyone was standing on. Du Ju and Jinsibe and Langleng looked on, and continued to order expressionlessly, again. The second wave of cleanup was done by the elusive world of immortals. The third wave was naturally done by the illusory ocean of blood. It must be said that the group of supreme martial artists were very confident, and their strength was very strong. They had only rotated once, and a large area of the slanting valley had already been cleared. It was obviously an almost impossible task, but a lot of it had been completed in a short period of time. With such efficiency, it would not be difficult for them to clean up this place, and it would not take too long. The loud rumbling sounds of the mountains collapsing and the earth cracking were incessant. It was the sound of the large chunks of snow being thrown out. It seemed as if the whole earth was shaking. With their venerable level spiritual senses, Du Ju and Jinsibe could faintly sense that there was definitely something special beneath the layer of snow. Otherwise, they would never believe that a mere Chu Chi Hun could kill 7 experts in one fell swoop and even cause a supreme martial artist to flee in a sorry state with serious injuries. If it was the venerable Mei, this kind of result would still be reasonable. But Chu Chi Hun? What virtue or ability did he have? Even if the 8 experts were to kill each other, Chu Chi-Huan would not be able to reach such a level. The conclusion was, impossible. Jinsibe looked at the movements in front of him, and without turning his head, he called out, "Bai Wu Xian. Come here." Bai Wu Xian's heart was wrapped in a thick white cloth, but the bone-piercing pain was still tormenting him, causing him to grit his teeth from time to time. His bones had almost been pierced through by a sword. The fact that he was still able to stand here was already a feat of steel. Hearing Bai Wu Xian's words, he hurried over. He asked respectfully, "What instructions does Second Master have for me?" Towards this Lord Jinsibe, no one had ever dared to call him Second Palace Master. Everyone addressed him as Second Master, because this Second Master's temper was much more violent than the Lord's. When the Lord was angry, he would at most be locked up or given some punishment. But when the Second Master was angry, then, mercy would descend. "Tell me everything that happened in detail. Don't leave out anything. Even if it's inconceivable, you have to tell me everything." Jinsibe raised his eyebrows and said in a heavy tone. Chapter 626. At this time, Bai Wu Xian's heart was in so much pain that it felt like it was about to split open. Being able to stand up and reply was already a difficult feat, but facing the questioning of this true grandpa, he did not dare to be negligent. Left with no choice, he could only explain everything in detail once more. He did not conceal anything, no matter how big or small. Even now, Bai Wuxian's anger towards Ma Jiangming and the Ruan brothers had not dissipated. Naturally, he would speak the truth. If not for those three bastards suddenly fighting amongst themselves, would this daddy's head have been slashed open like that? Just a hair's breadth away from splitting my brain. My heavens! That's going to take my life. Even though Ma Jiangming's head and Ruan Yang's corpse had already been placed to the side, Bai Wuxian's anger was still not appeased, and he almost wanted to kick them again. As they listened to Bai Wuxian's story, the faces of Zhen Sibei, Du Ju, and Zi Jinghong all darkened. Towards the three of them suddenly acting like rats in a nest, the three of them were extremely confused. No matter how they looked at it, the three of them should not have acted so rashly. Inspect the corpse carefully, Zhen Sibei and Leng Leng ordered. The three of them walked over to the corpse and inspected it carefully. Du Ju was extremely ruthless. With a schwa sound, he directly stripped Ruan Yang's corpse clean. Then, he pieced Ma Jiangming's corpse back together, and it was actually extremely complete. Second brother Ruan's body clearly has many needle marks all over his neck, thighs, buttocks, back. There's a total of 21 times. Ma Jiangming is an expert in flying needles. Could it be that this was done by Ma Jiangming? Furthermore, there's a pool of blood at second brother Ruan's crotch. It's from his back. He should have been injured there. The location of the injury is too strange, and it's hard to determine what it was caused by. From the blood flow, it's very likely that it was a hidden needle weapon. But after searching the surroundings, we only found a few needles, far less than the location of the injury. Furthermore, there is no trace of blood on these needles. This is extremely strange. Zi Jinghong naturally wanted to find an excuse for his men, but the more he spoke, the stranger his expression became. In the end, he decided to just shut his mouth. What would it take to plot against a superior supreme expert's backyard? Even if he racked his brains, he wouldn't be able to come up with an answer to this question. It couldn't be that the second son of the Ruan clan would just stick up his butt and let himself be blown up, right? That was a little too ridiculous. One couldn't help but admire Ma Jiangming's methods. As expected of the soul-chasing shadowless needle. How domineering. Du Ju's face darkened, but he didn't say a word.
He continued to examine it carefully, his face as dark as the bottom of a pot. There's no need to look any further. Ma Jiangming must have ambushed them from behind, toying with them. The two of them couldn't bear the humiliation, and retaliated in anger. The real life and death battle should have started after the second son of the Ruan clan was struck in his back. Such a great humiliation naturally turned into anger, and the three of them fought to the death. As for the needle marks and no steel needles, I think it's because Ma Jiangming had only used ice needles at the start. Zhen Sibei snorted and gave his conclusion. His conclusion was basically the same as the truth. It could be seen that this person's reasoning ability was very good. The only mistake he had made was that he had pinned the blame on Ma Jiangming for the person who had used the ice needles. Zi Jinghong and Du Ju were also thinking the same thing. So, they couldn't help but nod in agreement. Ma Jiangming was known as the soul-chasing shadowless needle. So, it was reasonable for him to be able to do this. However, Ma Jiangming's injuries were even stranger. The real cause of his death wasn't a sword wound. Instead, it was a continuous kick to the lower part of his body. Then, someone continued to beat him until his 5 viscera and 6 bowels were smashed to pieces. Then, someone mercilessly kicked him several dozen times in the same place, sending him flying high into the sky. Kicking a person to death, and then continuously kicking the corpse high up into the air. Only when we arrived did it finally land. Du Ju sighed heavily, furrowing his brows as he looked at the pieces of Ma Jiangming's corpse that he had dismembered. This person's methods are extremely cruel and terrifying. His grandmother, he's even more ruthless than me. He's an out-and-out perverted murderer. Otherwise, Du Ju, with our strength, killing Ma Jiangming wouldn't take much effort. But, do you really have the ability to continuously kick him over 100 zhang into the sky? Zhen Sibei Langlang looked at him and said mockingly, at the very least, I don't think I have the ability to do it. If you can, then I must congratulate you. It turns out that you've already broken through to the venerable realm. Du Ju instantly understood Zhen Sibei's meaning. That's right, kicking him over 100 zhang. Then, the person who did it would have to follow Ma Jiangming's corpse all the way up. Does such a high-level movement technique really exist in this world? There was no need to breathe, no need to borrow strength. To kick him in the same place as he was in the air, Du Ju sucked in a deep breath. Suddenly, he felt a chill run down his spine. Suddenly, a thought flashed through his mind. That's not impossible. The Eagle King and the Crane King of the Tian Fa Forest can also do it. Zhen Sibei's eyes flashed. He didn't say anything.
This was something he hadn't thought of. His previous judgment was completely based on Xian techniques. This matter couldn't be explained by humans. If it was done by a flying-type beast king, then everything was reasonable. At the very least, it could be explained. Zhen Sibei twirled his beard and muttered, could it be that Tian Fa also participated in this battle? At this time, Ma Jiangming's corpse isn't complete. There's still a very important object missing. Du Ju took a final look and discovered that something was wrong. Even if he was kicked away, there should still be traces. Even if he was kicked into a pulp, he should still be hanging there. How come that thing is gone? Isn't this the same as dying without an intact corpse? Death is a big deal. Let's bury his corpse in one piece. Someone help us look for it. 3-star king level master Xiao Weicheng stumbled over. Third city lord, that Ma Jiangming, he didn't have anything down there in the first place. Du Ju's face turned pale. Turning his head, he spat on the ground. Fucking bad luck. Just as they were fighting until their eyes were red, and they were about to become one with the sword, Chu Chihuan suddenly appeared. Bai Wu Xian saw that the big shots had finished inspecting the corpse and continued. Stop! Zhen Sibei waved his hand and thought for a moment. Then, he called over 5 people and had them stand in their positions. Continue speaking. Was this the position you guys were standing in? Yes. Just like that, in that instant, I suddenly felt a sense of danger. I charged forward, but I was still heavily injured. Only then did I realize that the 2 companions behind me were already dead. At the same time, the other 2 were also killed. One was stabbed in the back of the neck, and the other was slashed from the shoulder all the way to the abdomen. Wait! Du Ju waved his hand and interrupted him. Going over to inspect the injuries of the corpses, he said, Hermitage was ambushed first, and then the Supreme Golden City. In that case, this doesn't make sense. That's right. Zhen Sibei nodded his head and fell into deep thought. Du Ju leapt up soundlessly, disappearing into the snow. Following that, he suddenly appeared beside the 5 people, his hand in a sword stance. Then, he swept his sword horizontally, stabbing towards the back of the head of the person standing at Bai Wu Xian's position. Then, with a schwa sound, he appeared behind the 2 people from the Supreme Golden City. Pausing, he shook his head and said, It's impossible. The murderer is definitely not one person. There must be at least 2 people. That's right, there must be at least 2 people acting at the same time for this to happen. Furthermore, these 2 people must have the strength of a top-notch assassin like Chu Chihuan. This kind of meticulous grasp of timing is extremely rare. Although our people are all paying attention to the battle, they still have the vigilance of a supreme martial artist. Any slight movement of the grass in the wind would be enough to deal with it. Thus, the 2 assassins who acted this time are both top-notch experts. If it was just Chu Chihuan alone, there's no way he would be able to do this. Zhen Sibei Lengleng looked at Bai Wu Xian and said, Bai Wu Xian, your report is not true. You're so afraid of death that you didn't even dare to turn your head and ran away. Yet, you're still trying to mislead us with false information. What is the meaning of this? Bai Wu Xian's face turned pale with fright, and his lean face was filled with panic. Second Master, what do you mean by this? I, Bai Wu Xian, have already been in the hermitage for 100 years. Could it be that Second Master still doesn't know what kind of person I am? There's no need to mention the past. Right now, I only know that you're afraid of death, running away when you're in danger, not caring about your own brothers and comrades. Furthermore, you're making things up out of nothing, spouting nonsense to mislead us. Bai Wu Xian, someone like you truly deserves to die. Zhen Sibei looked at him coldly, the killing intent in his eyes growing thicker and thicker. Bai Wu Xian, this seat shall bestow you with mercy today. If you're willing to take your own life, you can leave your corpse intact. But if this seat takes action personally, the result will be hard to say. Bai Wu Xian retreated 2 steps with a schwa sound, his face filled with grief and indignation. Second Master, if you want to incriminate me, there's no need to worry about excuses. At that time, Bai Wu Xian didn't want to run away. But if I didn't run with all my strength, even if I hesitated for the slightest bit, I would still have died under the enemy's sword. Second Master, where did your information come from? I, Bai Wu Xian, would rather destroy my own reputation to bring back information and show my sincerity towards the immortal palace. How could I possibly intentionally mislead you? Unfortunately, there was no meaning in any explanation. A benevolent smile hung on Zhen Sibei's face as he floated up like a white cloud. His palms slammed down as he said coldly, no matter how glib your tongue is, you won't be able to escape death today. If you don't die, how can you atone for your sins? Are you really not willing to take your own life? Bai Wu Xian parried with all his might, his expression filled with grief and indignation. With a schwa sound, his sword flew out of its sheath. He shouted in grief, Zhen Sibei, I will never give in to your perverse ways. Let's see if your mercy can really reach me. You still dare to use your sword against me? Overestimating your own abilities. I've already given you a chance, but you're the one who gave it up. Zhen Sibei laughed savagely as he clasped his hands together and roared, trap. An inexplicable force burst forth from his palms, vast and boundless, as if connecting the heavens and the earth. Bai Wu Xian suddenly found that he couldn't move a single muscle. In fact, he couldn't even blink his eyes. This was the power of heaven and earth that only venerable experts could comprehend. Power of heaven and earth, become my cage. This was already a tiny bit of the power of heaven and earth. This kind of power, only Mei Xuan had ever used it before. Chapter 627. Bai Wu Xian stood there in a daze, trying his best to struggle, but to no avail. His eyes were filled with despair as he watched Zhen Sibei's hand land on his forehead. With a paw sound, his brains burst out, and his entire head was smashed into pieces like a watermelon. His death was too horrible to look at. Everyone was silent out of fear. Du Ju looked on coldly from the side, a dark expression on his face. A superior supreme, and Zhen Sibei had actually killed him without the slightest bit of mercy. Bai Wu Xian's corpse slowly fell to the ground. At this time, the crowd outside suddenly exclaimed in shock. Zhen Sibei and Du Ju turned around, only to see a huge hole the size of a house on the left side of the mountain. It was pitch black, and it was hard to tell how deep it was. There's indeed something strange here. Zhen Sibei stroked his beard, a bright light flashing in his eyes. Come, let's go take a look. Underground, Chu Chihuan looked at Jun Moxie as if he was looking at a ghost. You've won. Supreme Chu said, sighing in disappointment. I can't compare to you, and I'm ashamed of my inferiority. You are the true king of the world of assassins. Fully deserving of the title. The title of Supreme Assassin no longer belongs to me. Chu Chihuan's voice was filled with disappointment, shame, admiration, and praise. Chu Chihuan watched everything unfold, and he knew clearly that he had lost, and he had lost convincingly. On the surface, it seemed like he had killed two great masters from the Supreme Golden City and one superior master from the illusory Blood Sea. Jun Mo Xia had also killed 3 of them with a sneak attack and injured one. As for Ma Jiangming, he didn't even count. On the surface, Jun Moxie only had the upper hand, and the gap was very small. But Chu Chihuan knew very well that he had lost completely. Because all of this had been planned by Jun Moxie. All the opportunities had appeared because of Jun Moxie's plan. Otherwise, this wouldn't have been the result. Chu Chi-hun was good at making use of opportunities and seizing them. Any small opportunity would be grasped by him. Using his elusive movements, it would be a fatal blow. As an assassin, this seemed to be enough. He had always been proud of this and had always thought that this was enough. But today, in front of him, this young man had used reality to teach him a lesson. As an assassin, a top assassin, not only must he know how to make use of opportunities, but he must also use all means to create opportunities when there are no opportunities. If Chu Chihuan were to face these 8 experts by himself, he would only be able to kill one of them with a sneak attack. Even if he were to be surrounded by so many strong enemies, it would be difficult for him to escape unscathed. Because he would have to face the joint attack of the other 7 experts. However, Jun Moxie had cleverly created an opportunity to annihilate all 8 of them in one fell swoop. This method was close to a miracle. The gap between them was completely incomparable. Taking advantage of opportunities is passive. But creating opportunities is active. Only by creating opportunities, one can grasp the best opportunity. Just waiting for others to be careless was like waiting for a rabbit to come to them. Chu Chihuan had every reason to believe that even if Ma Jiangming and the Ruan brothers had not had a dispute, Jun Moxie would have used other methods to attract their attention, or used other contradictions to incite them to fight. He could definitely do it. However, he had never thought about this aspect. He had never considered it at all. Not only did he not do it, he did not even think about it. This was the gap. A gap that was hard to catch up. Thank you for letting me win. Jun Moxie smiled and did not bother with pleasantries. Because he could clearly feel that Chu Chihuan was very lacking in this aspect. A king of assassins, a supreme assassin, was not just capable of killing people. There was also a lot of knowledge in this. If there was an opportunity, he must make use of it to its fullest potential. Even if there was no opportunity, he must create an opportunity for himself. This was the most complete concept of an assassin. Such a concept was also suitable for any other industry, be it people of all religions or even officialdom, official career, marketing, or business. All of them were the same. Everyone had an opportunity. When there was no opportunity, the opportunity created by oneself would be more suitable for oneself. So, when there was no path in front of us, we must pave a path for ourselves if we want to move forward. The more there was no path, the more likely it was that we could create a golden path. When I get out of here alive, I will announce this news to the world. The supreme assassin is no longer Chu Chihuan. Chu Chihuan's voice was low, but it was from the bottom of his heart. My skills are not as good as others. If I still call myself the supreme assassin, it will be a disgrace to me. I do not need the recognition of the world, so you don't have to do this. Whether the world recognizes me or not, what does it have to do with me? Jun Mo Xia raised his head and smiled arrogantly. He said disdainfully, I only need your acknowledgement. That's enough. As Jun Moxie spoke, he heaved a sigh of relief in his heart. He thought with some relief, the evil monarch did not lose our face after all. Thinking of this, his heart turned sour. What does the world have to do with me? You have really won my heart. Chu Chihuan was startled, and then he suddenly laughed. Then he looked at the 3 of them and said in a deep voice, until now, I still haven't asked for your names. The 3 of them were stunned when they heard this. They had thought that Chu Chihuan had already known their identities. They didn't expect that he really didn't know. This was Chu Chihuan's strange temper. He had never made friends with anyone in his life, so he would never ask for someone's name. Before this, the only thing he remembered was the name of his assassination target. Chu Chihuan had always thought that there was no one in the world who was worthy of him asking for his name, and no one was qualified to be his friend. No one was qualified to be his friend. It was the first time for this killer to ask for someone's name. It was the first time for a typical young lady to get on a bridal sedan chair. My name is June Moxie, this is my mother, Dongfang Wenxin, this is my wife, Mei, I won't tell you her full name. June Moxie beamed with delight, taking advantage of them again. You are June Moxie. You are Dongfang Wenxin. Chu Chihuan was shocked, and suddenly asked, are you the widow of General Jun Wuhui? The Dongfang family's Miss Wenxin? Yes, I am. Dongfang Wenxin's eyes turned red, but she forced herself to be calm and said, I have lived for so long, but I have brought shame to my late husband's name. Please don't laugh at me, Senior Chu. Suddenly hearing her husband's name from someone else's mouth, that familiar feeling suddenly made Dongfang Wenxin's heart sour, and she couldn't control herself. What are you talking about, madam? Chu Chihuan's face became serious. Although General Jun is my junior, he is a hero, courageous, and chivalrous. I am a cold-blooded killer, and I have never been convinced by anyone, but Jun Wuhui is the only exception. Madam's love for her husband is earth-shattering, and she is willing to sleep with heaven and earth for her husband, which should be admired by the world. It also makes those women who are greedy for wealth and enjoyment feel ashamed. The heroic husband and wife complement each other, so how can they be ashamed? Chu Chihuan let out a long sigh, and said, that year, I had the honor of meeting General Jun, because someone offered me 30 million taels of silver to assassinate Jun Wuhui. After I investigated, the more I admired him, and finally, I gave up on the deal. That was also the first and only time in my life that I gave up on my own initiative. He laughed bitterly. Chu Chihuan, have always been a cold-blooded butcher, and I never cared whether the other party was a loyal minister or a virtuous wife. As long as someone could afford it, I would never be soft-hearted. But that time, I was really convinced by Jun Wuhui. I once sneaked into the army camp and watched him for 3 days, before I left. On behalf of my late husband, I thank Mr. Chu for his mercy. Dongfang Wenxin stood up and bowed. Who was the person who asked you to kill my father? Can you give me a name? Jun Moxie frowned, but he was concerned about this question. This matter had been picked out one by one, but the more he investigated, the more complicated it became. The buyer that day was the imperial tutor of the Yutang Empire, Fei Mengchen. Chu Chihuan hesitated for a while. I did not accept his request, so he is not my client. So, it is not a big deal for me to tell you. Although he said that, Jun Moxie understood that it was a taboo for an assassin to tell his client. Although Chu Chihuan said so, he had already owed him a big favor. Chu Chihuan, I was thinking about your movement skills. There is something wrong with your movement skills. Mei Shuiyan looked at Chu Chihuan quietly, and her eyebrows were slightly furrowed. She looked at Chu Chihuan suspiciously, and her eyes were filled with hatred. Do you know about the war for seizing the heavens? Venerable Mei indeed has a good eye. How could Chu Chihuan not know who this beauty was? When she fought against more than 30 experts alone, Chu Chihuan had seen it with his own eyes, so he did not dare to neglect her. My teacher was fortunate enough to fight on the pillar of heaven's peak, and fell down the cliff with heavy injuries. Luckily, he did not die, but his Xian cultivation was half crippled, and his body was also crippled. After a lot of hard work, he took a long time to recover. Finally, he accepted me as his disciple by chance. A pained smile appeared on Chu Chihuan's face. He lowered his head and said slowly, although my teacher's Xian cultivation could not advance any further, he knew how to take care of his health, so his lifespan was not in danger. Although he could no longer practice Xian cultivation, he had developed an interest in the strange race's movement skills. Chu Chihuan sighed deeply and said, "My teacher once said that the strange race's biggest threat to us is their strange movement skills. Because they can hide themselves at any time, and it is hard to see them with the naked eye. Countless experts with higher cultivation than them have suffered from their strange movement skills. My teacher was the same. So my teacher spent the last few hundred years of his life trying to find a way to break that strange movement skill. Your teacher is a wise man, I wonder if he has found a way to deal with it." Mei Shuiyan's eyes lit up, and she asked hurriedly. Now the monthly votes have been pulled apart by tens of votes. Brothers, sisters, can you still fight? Can you still fight? Can you still fight? I have not fallen yet. I am still fighting. Still exploding. I hope you can use your monthly votes to tell me. Chapter 628. Unsolvable. Chu Chihuan sighed and said, "My teacher had pondered for over 100 years, but he still could not solve it. Although he was unable to solve it, it was not without any gains. My teacher studied the strange movement techniques of the strange races, and combined them with many of the Xian continent's movement techniques. Finally, he came up with a unique set of mental cultivation techniques. This set of mental cultivation techniques, combined with movement techniques, actually has the same effect as the strange race's stealth assassination technique. And what I'm using now is precisely this set of movement techniques." Venerable Mei said that it has something to do with the war for seizing the heavens, and he is not wrong. Because this set of movement techniques originated from the strange race's stealth assassination technique. So that's how it is. Mei Shuiyan let out a long breath, and her expression calmed down as she said, "Your teacher is really a respectable senior. He is crippled but not crippled, and is still able to benefit his descendants." Just as the few of them were chatting excitedly, a bright light suddenly flashed above their heads. About 100 zhang above ground, a pile of snow that was tens of zhang high had been lifted up, revealing a man-made cave entrance. The four of them were shocked, and Chu Chihuan even stood up with a schwa sound. Don't be anxious, they won't be able to come down. If they dare to come down, that would be even more fun. June Moxie snorted and said, "I didn't think that there would be a few people with brains this time. What a surprise. But, do you think that this is all?" June Dashao laughed, and a milky white mist suddenly rose from his body. He shouted, "Dive!" Under the shocked gazes of Chu Chihuan and Dongfang, the ground beneath their feet suddenly dropped downwards. This time, it was different from the previous time. The last time Jun Imo Xia had fallen, he had only wanted to find a place to hide. But now, he was discovered even though he was more than 100 feet underground. Jun Imo Xia was a little angry. Therefore, this time, it was a long fall of several hundred feet. For a moment, even Chu Chihuan felt like he was dreaming. Mei Shuiyan had already carried Dongfang Wenxin up when she was falling, so that her feet were off the ground. Chu Chihuan had thought that the hold the four of them were hiding in was actually prepared by Jun Moxie long ago. Only now did he realize that it was not the case at all. It was a last-minute creation. When he thought of how Jun Moxie could sneak in as he pleased and had no limits to his terrifying methods, this shocking fact caused the supreme assassin's mind to be thrown into chaos. There was actually such a miraculous technique in this world. Great divine ability. I'm afraid the people who have come this time are not to be underestimated. We might not be able to deal with them easily. I'm afraid there will be a huge battle soon. Jun Moxie controlled the momentum of his descent and said to Mei Shuiyan cautiously, "There are two especially powerful auras above us. Even compared to you, they are not much weaker. But no matter what, don't make a move. Protecting Mother is your only mission. Leave everything else to us. Those are venerable realm cultivators. Can you two handle them?" Mei Shuiyan stared at him and said, "Don't force yourself. If I make a move, I'm sure we will have a higher chance of winning. Don't worry. In this environment, even if the golden deities of the great all-embracing heaven come down, they will all die. Jun Moxie said fiercely. That's right. Speaking of sneak attacks, those who are better than us in this world are probably still in their mother's wombs. Chu Chihuan laughed and said confidently. During this period of time, Jun Moxie had helped him to recuperate his body. This allowed his Xian Qi and body to recover to their best condition. This was the time when he was bursting with confidence. In the dark underground cave, the two king of assassins were ready to strike. But looking down from above, there was only endless darkness. There was no movement at all. What should we do now? Zi Jinghong stuck his head out to look at this dark and bottomless cave. He could only feel that there was a faint ghostly aura coming out of it, and he felt a little apprehensive. She felt a little nervous and suggested, "Why don't we just fill up this big cave and suffocate them to death? That will save us a lot of trouble." Faction leader Z, how do you know that there are no other forks in this cave? Or maybe there is a whole other cave? Or maybe, this is an exit to the outside of the slanting valley? Fill it up. This suggestion of yours really makes this old man smile. Zhen Xiaibei laughed as he looked at Zi Jinghong and said in an amiable manner. Zi Jinghong's face turned red, and he was so embarrassed that he couldn't say anything. Send people down to check. Send 2 groups at the same time. The first group of 3 people will form a triangular formation. The second group of 5 people will form a circle. The 2 groups of people will be separated by 5 zhang. They will guard each other from top to bottom. This way, we can ensure our safety. Du Ju ordered Lengleng. Zhen Sibei smiled amiably and said, "That's right. City Lord Du's suggestion is very good. This way, we can avoid a lot of casualties. This time, for the sake of mutual understanding, every group of people should come from the same place. Otherwise, we won't be able to bear another tragedy like Ma Jiangming and the Ruan brothers." Palace Lord Z, don't you think so? Zi Jinghong said indifferently, "Second Master's words are reasonable. Since that's the case, I ask Second Master to deploy the people." Zi Jinghong was well aware of Du Ju and Zhen Sibei's intentions. These 2 old geezers wanted the people of the illusory ocean of blood to be the first batch of cannon fodder. Therefore, Zi Jinghong wisely withdrew from the decision-making group and threw the problem back to Zhen Sibei. "You're the one giving the orders. You can't not send your own people, right? How can you convince the people if you still send people from other sects?" "Very well. This old man has lived for a few more years here. In that case, this old man will be thick-skinned." A sharp light flashed in Zhen Sibei's eyes. He laughed and said, "The people of the illusory ocean of blood live in the fog of the blood sea all year round. So, they should be more familiar with this kind of dark environment. I suggest that the illusory ocean of blood send out 3 people first. What do you think? Brother Du, do you have a different opinion?" Du Ju rolled his eyes and said with a fake smile, "That's right, Brother Zhen's words make a lot of sense. The Blood Sea is indeed the most suitable for the first wave of search. As for the second wave, it would be a grand and majestic formation. In this aspect, our Supreme Golden City is far inferior to the elusive world of immortals. As for the second wave, let the people of the Immortal Palace do it. I'll wait here and wait for the good news. Naturally, if there's a need for the third wave, our great Golden City will not shirk." Zi Jinghong secretly cursed in her heart, "Shameless. This is too shameless. These 2 old geezers schemed and schemed. They didn't care about their reputation at all. They wanted the people of the illusory ocean of blood to be cannon fodder first. It seemed that the 2 holy lands had already given birth to the idea of preserving their own strength after the recent losses. After all, the losses of any of the 3 clans were not small. Almost 100 people from the 3 holy lands were stuffed into this bottomless pit. Zhen Xiaibei was also extremely unhappy at this moment. He hadn't expected that Du Ju would take advantage of the situation to make a fool out of him. He had originally planned to stay behind to take advantage of the situation, but he was still pushed into the second wave. Although he wasn't the most direct cannon fodder, there was still quite a bit of risk involved. Both of them were cursing in their hearts. Damn it, with the two of us probing, why would there be a need for the third wave? Du Ju's words of duty-bound were simply a bunch of high-sounding bullsh*t. Wasn't he cursing all of us to die? Go down. Zhen Sibei ordered in a low voice, if there's an accident, give a long whistle to warn. Zi Jinghong nodded and pointed out 3 superior supreme experts from the illusory blood sea to step forward. The 3 of them had always been inseparable and had excellent teamwork. Moreover, their cultivation level was considered to be among the top in the illusory blood sea. Even if it was disadvantageous for them to go down, they wouldn't be killed without a chance to fight back. At least they could hold on until the Hermitage people came down. Stop every 10 feet and leave a mark. Make the stairway to heaven. Du Ju added another order. Under the watchful eyes of the crowd, the 3 illusory blood sea experts leaped up at the same time, forming an equilateral triangle in mid-air and suddenly landed. The position where they landed was close to the wall of the cave. The long swords in one hand shone brightly and the other hand was placed horizontally in front of their chest, accumulating a mysterious palm force, ready to attack or push against the wall at any time. Behind them, 5 white-robed men from the Hermitage stood up and followed closely behind, jumping down. This time, all the people who went down were superior supreme experts. The 8 of them maintained the same movement, rising and falling at the same time. At the same time, they stopped their bodies on the wall of the cave and slowly descended at almost the same frequency. At the bottom of the cave. Emos, yeah, the opponents are so powerful, we can't fight them recklessly. Mei Shuiyan frowned and said anxiously, let's leave first. As the saying goes, revenge is a dish best served cold. I heard what was said just now. The people who spoke were the second in command of the Hermitage, the compassionate Venerable Zhen Sibei, and the third in command of the Supreme Golden City, the heartless Venerable Du Ju. These 2 people are at the same level as me. Moreover, there are more than 100 experts. Emos, yeah, for the sake of your mother, bear with it for a moment and leave. I know you must have other ways to escape. Jun Moxie was stunned. He looked at the 8 people who were slowly descending, gritted his teeth and said, all right. You guys follow me closely. Jun Moxie waved his hand, and a dark hole suddenly appeared at the side of the cave. The 4 of them quickly went in, and the hole closed instantly. There was no sound, no trace. But when Jun Moxie went in last, a ruthless look flashed in his eyes. In the time it took to drink a cup of tea, the 3 experts from the Blood Sea reached the bottom of the cave. What surprised them was that there was no water at such a deep place, and it was very dry. Also, there was no one down there. Looking up, the gray sky was only the size of a teacup. Roughly estimating, this cave was at least 500 feet deep. Wait, no one? How could there be no one? Where did they go? The few of them carefully knocked on the walls of the cave. It was all solid ground, and there were even some hard rocks. Not to mention humans, even a mouse would find it hard to go through. This was really strange. The 3 of them looked at each other. And just at this time, Jun Emos, who had already burrowed into the ground, suddenly turned around. A cruel light flashed in his eyes, and he clasped his hands together, assuming a strange posture. Suddenly, his body emitted a blurry yellow light. The power of Earth. Chapter 629. Third Watch. While the 3 from Illusory Ocean of Blood were in a daze, the 5 from Hermitage came down one after another. One of them couldn't help but ask, why isn't anyone here? Have you searched the surroundings? Obviously, he was also very surprised. No one. How strange. Why is there no one? An expert of the Blood Sea scratched his head in puzzlement. It seemed that he had not scratched his head since he had mastered the mysterious art. But now, he had picked up his childhood habit again. The 8 of them knocked and checked, and came to the same conclusion. This was a straight hollow, surrounded by solid walls made of thick soil and rocks. There was absolutely no other fork in the cave. It was even more impossible for the ground to be under his feet. That solid feeling clearly told everyone this fact. What a waste of time. The whole way down 500 feet, I was scared out of my wits. But in the end, I didn't find anyone. One of them laughed at himself and said, "Since there is no one, then we should hurry up. It's so dark here. Why do I feel like there's something wrong everywhere?" Since there was no one around, what was the point of staying here? This place was at least 500 feet underground. It was not a good place to be. Just as they were at a loss, one of them suddenly jumped up and shouted, "Everyone, look! Oh my God!" The other 7 didn't expect that this guy would be so ungentlemanly as to call out to the heavens. They couldn't help but laugh. Just as they were about to mock him, the 7 of them suddenly cried out in alarm, "Damn it, why is there so much water suddenly?" It turned out that water was gushing out from the ground like a spring. It was cool and refreshing. In the blink of an eye, the water had already reached their ankles. Just now, everyone had clearly checked that the dryness of the ground was already at its limit. It was not much different from the dryness of the brick kiln walls. But, why would there be water suddenly? However, now was not a good time to feel cool, nor was it a good time to think about the root of the problem. Water coming out of the bottom of the cave meant that, this cave, was about to collapse. Moreover, this was 500 feet below the surface of the ground. Once it collapsed, the 8 of them were shocked at the same time. They quickly jumped up and climbed up the stone wall. They climbed up as if they were flying. With the strength of these 8 people, they had a good chance of escaping if there were no accidents. The water level on the ground couldn't rise so fast. But suddenly, the wall above them started to shake violently for no reason. The 8 of them felt darkness in front of them. They cried out in unison, "This is bad." Large chunks of soil came crashing down in an instant, and there were also huge rocks in the middle. This was 500 feet underground. The 8 of them were scared out of their wits. They tried their best to rush up, but with a loud bang, they couldn't see anything in the darkness. The entire wall of the cave collapsed at the same time. A total of 8 superior supreme experts were actually buried alive in the cave. Above, Jinxi Bei and the rest were waiting for the good news. However, as they waited, they suddenly felt a tremor beneath their feet. Du Ju was the first to react. He leaped up and the rest jumped out of the cave. At the same time, the cave collapsed with a loud crash. Mud and stones from all directions were squeezed into the middle at the same time. In an instant, this square hole was completely blocked. Zhen Sibei and Zi Jinghong cursed at the same time, "Fuck. This is actually a trap." At this moment, Zhen Sibei's benevolent face was completely gone. He became ferocious and terrifying, as if he wanted to eat someone. He cursed in exasperation, "Fucking Chu Chihuan. Your whole family is a bunch of bastards. How could you come up with such a dirty trick? Fuck your ancestors." A benevolent and amiable old man suddenly started cursing like a shrew. What kind of feeling was that? How magnificent would it be? I don't know, but the experts of the 3 holy lands must have felt it in their hearts. All of them were as silent as cicadas in winter as they watched this white-bearded, compassionate, and merciful Supreme Master stomping his feet and cursing incessantly. He was cursing even more viciously than the fat woman who had her pants ripped open when she tripped in front of my house on a hot day. Zhen Sibei couldn't help but be angry and shocked. Just as a precaution, he had sent out 5 superior Supreme experts who were almost at the peak of their strength. Those were all top-notch experts who were only a step away from becoming venerable ones. If they were really lost here, the consequences would be unimaginable. So serious that even he couldn't bear it. And this plan was suggested by him. He had vetoed Zi Jinghong's correct suggestion. Zi Jinghong was also cursing with a red face. His heart was filled with grief, but there was also a faint sense of pleasure. Fuck your grandmother. Who asked you to set me up again? Look at you now. I only managed to bury 3 of my men, but you lost 5 of your men in one go. 2 more than my blood sea, and all of them were peak experts. Fuck you, if not for my men down there, I would have secretly gone to one side to enjoy myself. Duju grinned, his facial muscles twitching. There was a hint of schadenfreude in his eyes, but he said sympathetically, so this place was actually a trap. I really didn't expect, the 2 of you, my condolences. After all, the dead can't be brought back to life. The Xian continent is full of talents, and it's still possible to gather a few more experts. Du Ju's mischievous words made Shen Sibei and Zi Jinghong so angry that 1 Buddha was born, 2 Buddhas ascended to heaven, and 3 Buddhas nirvana. Was this still considered human speech? They were only buried alive. They weren't dead yet, and you're already asking for their condolences? Wasn't this a curse? Men! Dig up this hole as fast as you can. Quickly! Zhen Sibei's face was filled with anger. He placed his hands on his hips and shouted fiercely. On the other side, Zi Jinghong hurriedly gave the same order. Underground, in a certain direction, Jun Moxie closed his eyes and clasped his hands together. Suddenly, he spread his arms outwards, and circles of yellow light rippled out from his body. In an instant, it merged with the surrounding soil, and continued to spread out in a direction that was difficult to see with the naked eye. On Jun Moxie's body, circles of yellow light continued to emit, rapidly and endlessly. I want to make this place collapse. Finally, Jun Moxie's face paled. He opened his eyes, and a bloody light flashed in his eyes. He roared loudly, and an infinite amount of yellow light burst out. His body fell backwards in exhaustion, and he said hurriedly, "Quickly leave. Leave this place, the faster the better." Chu Chihuan grabbed his body, and rushed forward like a sharp sword through a dark tunnel. Mei Shuiyan followed closely behind, and disappeared in the blink of an eye. On the surface, just as the 3 Holy Lands were about to start digging to rescue people, an expert had just lifted up a large piece of soil. Suddenly, everyone felt the ground beneath their feet tremble. The ground beneath their feet shook merrily as if it was dancing. This time, the tremor was much stronger than the previous one. Even the stones on the ground were bounced high up into the air. Everyone felt that they couldn't even stand properly. Du Ju raised his head to look, and his face changed greatly. With a schwa sound, his face turned pale. He shouted, "Fuck! This place is going to collapse. How can there be a landslide? Everyone, quickly leave." With a whoosh sound, he moved like an arrow leaving the bow. The experts of the Supreme Golden City shouted and followed him, "Don't go. We haven't rescued the people yet, no one is allowed to." Zhen Sibei was so angry that he almost vomited blood. But, he couldn't help but stare blankly, and immediately shut his mouth. The 2 mountain peaks on both sides of the slanting valley shook at the same time. First, the snow on the mountain peaks rumbled and fell down with the momentum of 10,000 horses galloping. But, it wasn't over yet. The mountain peaks continued to shake, and suddenly, like a drunkard, they fell down. The 2 steep mountain peaks collapsed with a loud bang, one to the left and one to the right, smashing down towards the center of the valley. Countless thousands of kilogram boulders rolled down from the top of the mountain with a mighty momentum. It was as if a 10,000 zhang dike had suddenly been breached. Moreover, from the top to the bottom, it directly formed the idiom Mount Tai crushing down. Zhen Sibei's eyes widened as he roared, "Quickly run." Even his voice had changed pitch. Nearly 100 experts scattered like birds and beasts, but after all, they weren't as quick as Du Ju. In the end, many people were drowned in screaming and screaming. They could only use their own Xian Qi to resist. The rumbling sounds of the earth cracking and the mountain collapsing continued for the time it took to drink a cup of tea. At this time, looking at the valley again, it was already the same as the 2 mountain peaks on both sides. It was a flat land. Originally, it was called a valley because the two mountain peaks were sandwiched by a ravine. But now, it had become a flat land. In an instant, the blue sea turned into mulberry fields. This was how it was. The experts of the three holy lands were all panting heavily as they stood on the newly excavated plains. Their eyes were wide open as they stared at the inconceivable scene before them. They could only feel chills running down their backs as cold sweat trickled down their backs. All of their faces were pale, and their faces were completely drained of blood. Who could resist such a divine power of heaven and earth? Below, groans could be heard from time to time, and huge boulders were slowly being pushed away. It had to be said that the bones of these superior supreme experts were really tough. Such a large-scale landslide actually didn't smash them to death. But, each and every one of them was also injured. Their bodies and faces were covered in bruises and bruises. This was not the kind of place for marriage. There was complete silence. Suddenly, save them all. You bunch of bastards. Are you all fucking blockheads? Zhen Sibei hammered his chest and roared in anger. If this daddy doesn't speak, are you all going to just watch them struggle for their lives? A bunch of living trash. Fuck your grannies. Just as he finished scolding, he suddenly spat out a mouthful of blood in anger. His eyes were blood red. After a full 7 days, this place could finally be considered tidied up. A total of 152 people from the three holy lands had gathered here. Of the 17 people who were injured by the landslide, 2 had broken legs, and 3 had broken arms. The rest were also injured, and luckily, no one died. It was all thanks to this bunch of old bones that were really tough. Hundreds of years of Xian Qi, they were really not to be trifled with. You're tuning into the Passion Pages YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.